In compliance with the state and county shelter-at-home orders and as allowed by the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20, which allows for a deviation of teleconference rules required by the Ralph M. Brown Act, City Council meetings will be held by teleconference only until further notice. In compliance with the state and county shelter-at-home orders and as allowed by the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20, which allows for a deviation of teleconference rules required by the Brown Act, City Council meetings will be held by teleconference only until further notice. Rather than attending in person, residents should call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via telephone. The phone line will be open just prior to the start of the closed session meeting and again prior to the start of the regular meeting. Written public comments can be submitted via email to cityclerk@prcity.com prior to 12 noon on the day of the council meeting to be posted as an addendum to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number or name. City Council meetings will be live streamed during the meeting and also available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube. And with that, I welcome everyone to the regular meeting of the Paso Robles City Council for Tuesday, August the 4th. And I would invite all of us to mute our microphones with the exception of Councilman Gregory, who I would ask to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Join me. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. Excuse me. Pardon me. Could I have Fred Strong or John take over, please?
Certainly. Mr. Strong, you want to lead us in the pledge, please?
Surely, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And for our opening invocation/meditation, we have Mr. Dan Katchis on the line with us. Mr. Katchis, welcome.
Good evening, council members. It's my privilege to lead us in a prayer of invocation. If you would pray with me. Almighty God, sovereign Lord of all, we come before you this evening asking that you would grant wisdom to our city leaders, that they would render decisions that faithfully steward the local resources and environment under their care. We come asking that they would render decisions that would promote human flourishing for all in our community. We come asking for patience and kindness and humility in all the interactions, discussions, and debates. And we come asking for mercy over our city and our citizens in this time of COVID. And so to this end, we ask that you bless this council meeting in the name of your Son. Amen.
Thank you very much. May we please have a roll call of council members?
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Hammond.
Here.
Councilmember Strong.
Here.
And Mayor Martin.
I'm here. We'd like to set aside just a few brief moments during each meeting to allow our staff and other city representatives to introduce themselves. So I will turn it over to the staff now for those introductions.
Warren Frace, Community Development Director. With me tonight is Darcy Delgado, our Associate Planner.
Dick McKinley, Public Works.
Julie Dolan, Community Services Director, joined by Frida Berman, Maintenance Superintendent, and Cindy Patty, Recreation Staff Assistant.
Ty Lewis, Police Chief.
Randy Harris, Battalion Chief Fire Marshal.
Ryan Cornell, Administrative Services.
Sarah Johnson-Rios, Assistant City Manager, joined by Dave McHugh, IT Manager, Melissa Martin, Deputy City Clerk, and Shauna Howenstein, Civic Engagement Coordinator.
Kimberly Hood, Interim City Attorney.
And before finalizing the listing, I was just checking, are there any commissioners who would like to introduce themselves who are in the call tonight?
This is Roberta Jorgensen, Chairman of the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Anyone else?
This is Field Gibson, Planning Commissioner.
Ty Christensen, Planning Commissioner.
Joel Neal, Planning Commissioner.
Mark Kogler, Planning Commissioner.
Okay, hearing no other ones, this is Tom Frucci, City Manager. Back to you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Prior to the open meeting, we had a publicized closed session meeting of the Paso Robles City Council. I'll ask the city attorney now if there was any reportable action from that.
The council convened in closed session on 3 items, all 3 real property negotiations regarding the properties identified on the agenda, and there is no reportable action.
Thank you. Item number 1 on our agenda tonight is a presentation and update on the COVID-19 situation. Mr. Stornetta.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Sarah Johnson-Rios, Assistant City Manager, and Chief Stornetta has been deployed to the Park Hill fire, so I'll be giving the COVID-19 presentation this evening. I'm just going to pull up a presentation on my screen. So in terms of the numbers at the state level, California has reported 5,739 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday. The state now has a total of 514,901 positive cases, which is more than any other state in the country. There have been a total of 9,388 deaths in California to date. As of today, 41 counties, including San Luis Obispo County, are now on the state's monitoring list, which is what drives many of the state public health regulations that are in place. At the county level, SLO County remains on the monitoring list primarily due to the elevated disease transmission indicator regarding the case rate, and this is the state's indicator. A county that has more than 100 new cases per 100,000 population in the last 14 days will be on the monitoring list. So for SLO County, that threshold is around 285 cases over the last 14 days. And as of, I believe yesterday, SLO County had about 533 confirmed new cases over the last 14 days. As of today, SLO County has had a total of 1,926 confirmed cases. At this time, there are 317 active cases. And as of today, approximately 198, 200 or so of those active cases are in the Paso Robles area. And that includes the broader zip code area beyond the city limits as well. But there are many of them within city limits. That's roughly 60% of the current active cases in the county are in the Paso Robles area. So the chart on the screen indicates that over the past few weeks, Paso's case count has increased at a faster pace than other areas of the county. So you'll see the Paso Robles line in yellow on the top. Staff is working with the county to try to understand exactly what may be driving that. There are many factors that influence these numbers, and there's likely no single cause. The cases are dispersed throughout the city. They're not concentrated in one area. When we look at countywide transmission data, there's some transmission data that contact tracers are still developing. So there's some data that's incomplete, but transmission in the county appears to be by both community transmission as well as person-to-person transmission. And again, we're still trying to get additional nuanced data from the county. So what does this recent increase mean for us? Well, with the recent rates of infection increasing in Paso, we each have a greater chance of catching the virus than we did before, and also a higher risk of unknowingly spreading the virus to others. This is where individual behavior becomes critical in helping the broader community stay safe and helping keep infection rates low. In addition, these recent increases mean that it will be harder for us to be removed from the state monitoring list. And as a result, it could take longer to have the ability to fully reopen many businesses and schools. The city continues to actively message to keep the community actively message to the community that in order to keep each other safe and help reopen, we all need to work together to follow the public health guidelines. So please wear a face covering when out in public, maintain 6 feet of distance from those outside your household, practice good hygiene, and don't congregate in large groups. In response to state guidance allowing several types of businesses to operate outdoors only and not indoors, the city has made outdoor business options available. In recent weeks, based on requests from businesses and community stakeholder groups, Council directed staff to work with businesses and find solutions for outdoor operations. Staff has created several on-street dining areas downtown, as you can see on the map. These in-street areas are currently serving between 15 and 20 restaurants and tasting rooms, and there's interest from at least 5 additional businesses for in-street dining. In addition, some businesses are using sidewalk space in front of their businesses. And since the last council meeting, staff has worked with businesses to permit much of the existing sidewalk seating, some of which was happening without permits, and ensuring that pedestrian clearance is maintained. In addition, city staff has reviewed and approved a handful of permits for the use of private parking lots for business activity. And we have received some questions regarding how public health guidelines coexist with outdoor business options. So I wanted to address that. In-street dining started on July 24th in Paso, and Paso's confirmed case curve started showing a noticeable uptick on July 6th. So while we're monitoring the situation to date, there's no evidence of a causal relationship between outdoor dining and the current increase in cases. We'll continue to monitor that going forward and work with the county, again, on getting more nuanced data. It's important to note that outdoor business options must remain compliant with public health guidelines while operating. And as always, any violations of any state guidelines are able to be reported to the city's non-emergency dispatch line, as well as to the county's violation line. So Paso, like communities across the country, is facing a balancing act. While community health and safety is a primary concern, we're also recognizing that the economic and mental health toll that the pandemic is taking on many in our community. And some of the state's guidelines permitting outdoor business and some other modifications to normal operations, I think, are an effort to strike that balancing act as well. So while we're unlikely to be able to eliminate all risk of COVID-19 in our community, we can certainly work together to follow the public health guidance and help keep not only ourselves, but all of our community members safe. And doing so will be our best means of helping support our local economy. And with that, staff is available for any questions.
Thank you. This is a presentation item. No action necessary by the council. That being said, council comments, we'll take them in alphabetical order as we have been in previous meetings. So we rotate the council person who starts first, so everyone has the opportunity to lead off. Tonight's lead person is Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only question I really have, maybe an observation, Sarah, is that, understanding the way the virus can get into us, and obviously there's eyes, nose, and mouth. Is there any direction from the health agencies about the eyes? Because a lot of these masks I see going around aren't really even covering the nose, but even if the mask works, as best it could, you still have the eyes that could attract or bring in the virus. Is there anything direction-wise from the CDC?
Right. I haven't heard anything from the state or county on that. Honestly, I haven't heard anything from the CDC either. I have heard that mentioned on the national news. I did see that Dr. Fauci gave an interview on that, but we haven't heard anything. There's certainly no mandate in California that gets to that level of specificity. So I have not heard anything updated in terms of regulations, but I have heard that talk at the national level.
No, I had not either, and that's why I brought it up. Essentially, again, I think the biggest thing here is distance and disinfect. Just like we talked months ago about keeping yourself as clean as possible and have the distancing away from other people. That's really the biggest issue that I see is people are sometimes getting a little too close, but and not following the things we were taught as kids. Keep your hands clean. And don't touch your face. So that's all I had. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Councilman Hammond. Councilman Strong?
No, I have no questions.
Councilwoman Garcia?
Yes, sir. On the outdoor dining, I actually walked some of the East Side businesses, and they were asking about the outdoor dining permits. So I gave them the information, and I was just wondering if they have actually reached out to the city.
On that, I would defer to Mr. Frace or staff member that's working on that program.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. We did receive an inquiry today from, I think, the Oak Park Center over where Senior Sancho's is about a permit, so we're working on that. And then also the Lowe's Center, which is on the east side, has also made an inquiry.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and these I'm passing these along from constituents who have emailed me and some phone calls that I got on the Sound Off program this afternoon. First of all, there's a real concern among some folks that our playgrounds remain closed. The comment was made that apparently, and I haven't had a chance to ascertain this, apparently other cities are opening them with some sort of warning placard. I have reached out to the other mayors. I haven't received feedback from them yet on what their cities are doing. I'm just wondering, do we have an update on what the status of the playgrounds are and when we'll be able to open them again?
I did actually check in with the county EOC liaison on that again this afternoon. We know it's really of high interest to the community. The county reconfirmed that playgrounds are to remain closed, and expressed appreciation for those cities that are complying with that guidance. So we'll certainly continue to monitor that, and if the state provides any updated guidance, we'll let the community know.
Right. I just relate the fact that many people can't understand the difference between allowing people to dine together but not allowing kids to play together. And any sort of explanation that can be given, something a little more explicit, I think would help people understand better. And it just, confusion just breeds frustration sometimes. Could you comment, please, on, I've had a couple of questions now about the status of parking enforcement downtown.
My understanding is that parking enforcement has resumed, but is focused really on providing warnings at this time. And I would invite Chief Lewis to add anything additional.
Yes, Your Honor, that's correct. We have resumed enforcement of downtown parking regulations. We've kind of eased back into it. We're giving warnings, and but as we get more visitors to the area, and of course our employees are returning back to work, and the absence of additional parking spots at the parklets, we've been monitoring our parking situation to ensure that there's ample parking for those that want to visit our downtown, which includes adequate enforcement measures.
Thank you. And then there seems to be partial information out there about the city's participation in and application of the sidewalk and street side dining to the restaurants. We're obviously blocking off some parking spaces to do that. Could you comment, please, on what we've done as far as installing the K-rails? And also, there is also a concern that we are charging exorbitant fees for this. I've heard up to $5,000 per applicant. If you could speak to that, please.
Certainly. So, and I'll also invite staff who's managing the program to fill in more details. The sidewalk dining and in-street permit is, I believe, $393. That's deferred based on council's direction until 30 days after the end of the state or local emergency, whichever comes later. So there is no permit fee payment due at this time. And we still do have the longer term private parklet option on public property. If there's a business that wants that 1 year encroachment agreement, that has a slightly different fee structure, which I think is $1,000 payable in 4 increments over a year. But we haven't really seen a lot of interest in that option. So we've seen more interest in the deferred permit option, so nothing due at this time. And I would invite Frida Berman to comment on the city's involvement in installation of the in-street dining.
Yes, sir. We are collecting all the requests for in-street dining, reviewing those requests, and balancing the needs of neighboring businesses, reviewing requests that have questions with the police department, and then installing K-rail in the spaces that are appropriate for on-street dining. The businesses that have requested and received K-rail have not been charged anything for those items.
So for the K-rails, for people that don't know what they are, those are the long, heavy divider, the barrier material so that people don't drive into diners inadvertently. The city council recently decided to take that option. How much are we spending on that?
Each K-rail is a rental item, and they are $60 per month per K-rail. With all the requests that we've received to date, not all have been installed, but when all are installed, it will be about $7,000 per month for the K-rail.
Okay, and then I know that we've been assisting putting some dining surfaces in. Could you explain what money we're spending there and what that's being spent for?
There are 3 locations where it wasn't safe or accessible to have diners on the street. The slope was too great. So for safety and liability reasons, we built a simple platform to have a flat surface for dining. Those 3 locations, one was the labor was installed by the restaurant, supplied by the restaurant owner, and the city purchased the material. The other 2 locations plus that third one is at an expense of about $7,500.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. And this probably isn't for you, Frida, and whoever wants to grab this can. I've received a couple of emails from businesses who are not restaurants, but adjoining restaurants, who are concerned that their parking is being infringed upon. Who's in charge of refereeing this parking, no parking, dine, no dine situation?
Stacy Jacob with Travel Paso has reached out for most of the businesses in the downtown area. For all the ones that we've impacted, I'm not aware of any that have expressed concern. I'd like to follow up with them. Part of the program is to install short-term pickup signage for those businesses that are interested. I am aware that on 12th Street, the yogurt shop is very interested in that. That is the next step in this program, to install some temporary signage to allow those customers to go into those businesses and pick up what they need.
Okay, do I refer complaints to you and you refer them to Stacy? Do I send them to Stacy? How do people get action or at least response on these situations?
I'd be happy to respond to any questions that the business owners have, and anyone can reach me at the maintenance services number, which is 805-237-3873.
Very good. Thank you for that. And then one last question, and this is of a general nature, but one that I get repeatedly from members of the public, and that is, why don't we just tell the state to go pound sand and open our city up? Can somebody comment, please, on the downside of doing that?
I'd be happy to, Your Honor. Number one, we are required to observe the state guidelines, and the county has also adopted those. So the public health officer in this county actually has the authority to determine which of those guidelines are to be implemented, which ones are not. And so far we are adhering to those guidelines from both the county health officer and the state. And we believe not only is that the morally responsible approach for us to take, but also there are financial implications and legal implications if the city were not to do so. For example, the CARES Act funding, which the council approved the use of last meeting, and it is CARES Act funding that's paying for the K-rails and the platforms and the other expenses related to the outdoor dining. But in any event, we are not eligible for any of that money. That's $380-some thousand. We are not eligible for that. If we are found to not be in compliance with the state guidelines, and in addition, The state has already indicated that there are other programs for which we would not be eligible. We would also be at risk of facing legal enforcement actions. As you remember, the state had several of its departments go visit businesses in different counties. They, as far as I know, they have not visited our county, but they visited businesses in other county and basically threatened to shut them down if they did not adhere to the guidelines. And the same thing would be potentially for us if we chose to not adhere to the guidelines. And when I talk about the moral authority issue, that's also of importance because we need the public to adhere to, as Ms. Johnson-Rios talked about, the measures that will keep us all safe. And if we're not adhering to what we're being told to do, how do we expect our community members to adhere to what we're asking them to do?
Okay, and then a couple of questions for the city attorney, if I could. I've had a couple of people basically ask me, have I seen peer-reviewed medical reports that indicate that the actions taken by the state to counter the spread of coronavirus are actually effective? And secondly, what's the legal basis for the state being able to apply these mandates? There's obviously a lot of people who feel that their rights are being infringed upon illegally because the state is overreaching.
So there are state statutes that authorize the state to take the actions they're taking. That's why you'll see a lot of the orders are actually issued by the state health officer, and not by the governor himself. So there's a mix there. And also there have been some legal challenges to them, and those challenges have so far not been successful. The legal challenges to the orders that they've been upheld as necessary given the current health emergency and the findings that the state has provided to support that so far.
Okay, and one more before we move on. The issue of liability. If the city of Paso Robles were basically to say, we don't care about the CARES money, we don't care about the state programs they're going to deny to us if we go rogue on this. If we just simply open up the city and say, do whatever you want, go back to normal, and then someone winds up dying of COVID-19, are we more liable because we did not adhere to the state mandates?
I think liability is a difficult one. You certainly do. I think it opened the city up more when you're ignoring state orders and public health orders. And in addition, as the city manager noted, the more concrete issue is the loss of the funding, which the state is already asserting to certain cities like the city of Atwater that took that type of approach, that they are no longer entitled to the CARES Act funding.
Very good. I appreciate all that information. A lot of stuff to take in, but I do want to get as much information out to the public as possible. Again, to give people the best information. Hopefully that will reduce some of the frustration that's been produced by this situation. I don't have anybody from the community in the queue to comment on this presentation. Is that accurate?
No, Mayor Martin, we actually have 3 callers.
We do have. Okay, I don't see them on my document. So who's first?
The first caller is Norma Moy.
I think Norma is under general public comments.
You are correct, sir. My apologies.
Anybody under presentations?
No.
Thank you very much. We move on now to general public comments. This is the time the public may address the council on items within the council's purview, but not scheduled on the agenda for this evening. We would ask you to please begin by stating your name and address. Each person gets 3 minutes to speak. You will have a pleasant tone at the end of 3 minutes, and I will ask you to wrap it up then. Any person or subject requiring more than 3 minutes may be scheduled for a future council meeting or referred to committee or staff. Those persons wishing to speak on any item scheduled on the agenda will be given an opportunity to do so at the time that item is being considered. So now we open up general public comments. I do have Norma Moy on my list. Norma, are you with us?
Now?
Now's the time.
Oh, my name is Norma Moy, Downtown Main Street Association. And Mayor Martin and council, good evening, everybody. And it is a beautiful evening, huh? Okay, the Main Street Promotion Committee is planning a 2-day downtown crazy days because the town and everything is kind of crazy. But anyway, it's a 2-day sidewalk sale, August 20th and 21st. And it's outside you put your stuff on the sidewalk, and you've got to be creative. Like even the restaurants, they could give away a dessert or a free half, buy one. Anyway, we ask everybody to be very creative and to keep moving and to wear a mask. So we're going to have a mask contest. And we've got some great gifts for anybody that's real creative with a mask. So we need a little bit of help because everybody is struggling, and we can keep the crowds moving so they won't congregate in bunches. But we would love for you all to come down and stroll through our town. It is a beautiful town, lots of fresh air and wonderful people. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. I don't see anybody else on my list. Is anybody in the queue?
Yes, sir. We have Dale
Okay.
Guston up next.
Very good. Mr. Guston, welcome.
Thank you, Dale Guston, 945 Spring Street. As usual, tough act to follow when Norma's up there. But as a part of the Main Street Board of Directors, which I'm proud to be on, we are concerned about the lack of business downtown, especially during the week in the morning hours and the noon hours. And we would once again request that you abate the parking restrictions and paid parking until after this pandemic is over with. Also, there's something about that pandemic and the COVID-19 that I don't understand. They seem to be stressing about the number of people that are showing up positive, but they seem to ignore the number that have recovered. I know that I had this thing in January before they announced what it was, and I didn't go out in public. I didn't want to expose anybody. I didn't know what it was. But I got over it, and I am going to donate blood on Thursday, and then they're going to test my blood, and I don't have to report that to the government. I hate the government and the way they do things. But anyway, they will tell me if I have immunity. And if I have immunity, then I can give plasma the next time, and they can use that plasma to help people that are getting sick with this virus. So that's not a very well-known fact, but it is a system that's being used in other countries quite successfully. People that they know are developed the immunity, they take their blood donation of a plasma and give it to some people that are struggling, and it helps them get over it. So the other thing is the number of hospitalized in this county is pretty low. The number of deaths for the population is pretty low. And we're totally ignored on that. And that's the extent of my comments.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your comments. Do we have anyone else?
Yes, sir. We have one more caller, Linda George.
Hi, Linda. Are you with us?
Hi. My name
Welcome.
is Linda George, and I live on. Thank you. I'm new to the area. I moved here about a year ago and getting quite acquainted with everything. My concern relative to whether the city would be liable, I would say causation would be hard to prove, and I think that that's already being discussed. My concern is relative to the protests, because nobody wants to say the protests are increasing the spread and the blocking of the freeway. Because I see people saying that if someone blocks the freeways, or people wanting to go help the police and block the freeways themselves so that the riders and the protesters don't get on the freeway. So my concern is an overall concern for the county. I agree with the gentleman that prior, I had it. My son almost died from it in January before it had a name. Literally, he's 27 years old, and he spent 2 months in the hospital. We all had it. So a lot of us already have immunities to it. So my overall concern is nobody wants to say the protesting that is out there is a very big cause of the spread, because some are wearing masks, some are not. Whether or not anybody wants to admit that is kind of troubling for me. because it's evident to the naked eye of the general public. So I just want to put that out there so that the public knows I'm fighting the governor. I'm fighting Lorena Gonzalez on AB 5. I'm working with Kevin Kiley, the Republican that sued the governor. And absolutely there would be no liability to the city. But my final comment is that I hope that you guys take a look at the fact that we are still the lowest amount, even compared to San Benito County, where I came from, which is 2 cities. And their rates are way higher and their cases are spiking worse than ours. So I exhort that you guys consider that when you make any kinds of policies or public health mandates, that we are aware that the protests are part of the problem. And I just someone has to say it on record, okay?
You just did. Thank you.
And that's, yeah, I have to, because I've been fighting the governor, the recall, everything, not because I'm an anti-masker, not because I'm against government. I'm a 30-year government employee. Okay, I worked for the state for 30 years. And I'm just saying to everybody, as a 30-year state employer, you're being governed too much. So I love the city. It's beautiful. The heat is very cumbersome. But I hope that the city moves forward in acknowledging the fact that actually we're doing a really good job.
Very good.
At keeping our numbers low. Okay?
Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure to maybe one day I'll be there in person. You guys have a great evening.
Thank you, you too. Do we have anyone else?
Bye-bye.
Yes, sir. We have another caller, William Romo.
Mr. Romo, welcome.
Hi, how are you? 4610 Vista Crescent Lane. I actually just moved here not too long ago. Beautiful city, love it. Lovely sunsets. People are friendly, everyone's great. I just kind of wanted to piggyback on what everybody's saying, to look at what's really going on, and just kind of hope that we can open up quicker than most areas, since our numbers are reflectively and subjectively lower. And I agree. I feel like I also got very sick in December, January. I was out for 2 weeks almost. My kids all had bad coughs. Everyone got really sick. So I think that's something interesting that the gentleman earlier brought up, and I hope that the city looks into that.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
And that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
That was all of the callers for general public comment.
Thank you. We'll close general public comment. Try to get some comments and answers here. There was the announcement by Norma about the outdoor retailing, and I just want people to know that I asked city staff to contact County Public Health about the rules regarding outside retail. And Sarah, do you want to talk to that?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. Outdoor retail is permitted. I think Warren Frace might have some information on our zoning code regarding outdoor retail. And I just would say we appreciate Norma Moy's recommendations that anyone taking advantage of outdoor retail also follow the public health guidelines as we're recommending for anyone who's outdoor dining.
Very good. Warren, any further comment on that?
Yeah, the city does allow for temporary events, including sidewalk sales. So we would recommend that Main Street work with city staff to apply for that, and then we can get them the proper approvals.
Very good. I'll make sure they get in touch with you and that gets all ironed out. I just want to make sure for the public that, we're trying to follow the rules, not just for the restaurants, but for the retailers. So there was a mention there of a board member from Main Street with a comment about parking enforcement downtown, and I do appreciate that input. To my knowledge, the Main Street board has not made an official recommendation to the city on this. Am I wrong in that?
Your Honor, I'm not sure if that was directed at me, at the police chief. I'm not aware of any recommendations officially coming from through our advisory committee to the city.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the reason I ask is we rely upon organizations such as Main Street and their elective boards to make those recommendations for policy to us. So I think I would just like to, if Main Street wants to take that action and make that recommendation, we would be happy to hear that. But I just want to make sure that people realize that was the avenue and that was the way it was handled. There was a comment about ignoring the recovery numbers of the COVID infections in the county. And while it's true, we all seem to glom onto the number of people who have been infected. There is a large number of people who have recovered. Those numbers are available at emergencyslo.org. You can get to that site by going to the city's website, prcity.com. So if you'd like to know those stats and be made aware of the number of people who have recovered in this county from COVID, that information is readily available. And then the comments about the effect of protests and other assemblies on infection. I think it's common sense. We're told not to get close to each other. We're told to wear masks. So whenever we don't follow those recommendations, there's a possibility that that's going to spike the number of COVID infections, whether it's a protest march, whether it's just an assembly, a rally. So we all need to be aware of that whenever we plan or participate in those activities, to realize that, yes, that has the potential of raising the infection rate in our city. And we sort of lead that field right now, and would be very nice if we didn't lead it anymore. Okay, we move on now to our consent calendar. But first, I'll ask the city manager if we have any items on the agenda tonight that we will be deferring.
No, sir.
Very good. The consent calendar consists of items that we feel don't require independent individual discussion. That being said, anyone on the council, anyone in the community may ask a brief question before we take a vote on the consent calendar. Anyone on the council, anyone in the community may pull an item for full discussion. When that happens, we set it aside and we treat it like a regular agenda item. It is our general policy when we do that to put that at the end of the regular agenda. So I'll start at the head of our alphabetical list tonight with Councilman Hammond. Any comments?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Anything to be withdrawn?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Strong?
No to both questions.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia?
No, sir, none.
And Councilman Gregory?
No, sir.
Thank you. Do we have anybody in the queue from the public who would like to ask a question or ask an item to be withdrawn?
No, sir.
In that case, I would bring it back to the council and entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'd like to make a motion for the consent agenda. I move we approve items 2 through 8.
Second.
Is there a second? I have a motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Strong. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Mayor Martin?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. And for the benefit of those folks who have not seen our agenda, which I will remind people is available on the city website, complete with links to city staff reports. For those who have not seen the agenda, I will ask the city manager to please give a short report on the consent items that we've acted upon tonight.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tonight on its consent calendar, the council approved the special city council minutes from July 15th, as well as the minutes from its regular meeting on July 21st. The council received the warrant register, and that's the sum of the checks the city writes to pay for the goods and services it receives. And for this 2-week period, the warrant registered totaled $1.7 million, of which $312,000 was wastewater related. And then another almost $900,000 was for construction of major projects around the community, including the Union Road improvements in front of Barney Schwartz Park, the Barney Schwartz Park upper playground, for which will be reimbursed by the Rec Association, the 24th Street Bridge design, and the annual slurry seal project. In addition, the council on consent received advisory body meeting minutes from the Senior Citizen Advisory Committee and the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, designated Councilmember Strong as the voting delegate and Mayor Martin as the alternate for the 2020 League of California Cities Annual Conference, and gave them the authority to vote on resolutions coming before the body on behalf of the city. Approved an agreement with the Paso Robles Chamber of Commerce to operate the Visitor Center from July 1st through December 31st, 2020, and held second reading and adopted an ordinance imposing a 1-cent transaction and use tax subject to voter approval at the November 3rd, 2020 election. Those
Very
are
good.
the sum of the items on consent.
We thank you for that. Up next, we are going to convene the City of Paso Robles Planning Commission to a joint session with the City Council. And this is how this is going to work. We don't do this very often, and certainly I don't believe we've done this since the pandemic started. So as we convene this joint session, I will ask the chairperson for the Planning Commission, Roberta Jorgensen, to do a roll call. Then we will turn the floor over to staff to give us a presentation. We'll go back to the Planning Commission for Planning Commission questions, and I would emphasize both for the Planning Commission and for the Council during that period of time, they are for questions, not for comments or suggestions. And then we'll open it to the public. After that, we come back again for the Planning Commission thoughts and for the Council thoughts, and we'll wind it up after that. I know it sounds very convoluted, but hopefully it will proceed in an orderly and logical fashion. So with that, Chairperson Jorgensen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for inviting the Planning Commission to join you at this meeting for the discussion tonight. I'm Roberta Jorgensen. I'm the chair. And Mr. Freis, would you do roll call for the commission?
Yes, we'll have the city clerk call roll.
Thank you.
Commissioner Castillo? Commissioner Christensen?
Present.
Commissioner Davis? Commissioner Gibson?
Present.
Commissioner Kogler?
Present.
Commissioner Neal?
Present.
And Chairperson Jorgensen?
And I'm present as well. And I will just say that Commissioners Castillo and Davis had informed us in advance they would be unable to attend tonight.
Very good, and thank you for all of you being here and being part of the discussion. We appreciate that. We've already had our roll call. We know the council's all here. We are now convened in a joint session, Paso Robles City Council with the Paso Robles Planning Commission. I'll turn it over to city staff to give us a report on item number 9, which is the housing element update, our public workshop number 2.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Warren Freis, Community Development Director. We're pleased tonight to be holding this second public workshop on the housing element. I want to introduce our Associate Planner, Darcy Delgado. She's basically been the project manager. She's been spearheading this effort over the last 6 months, which has been a challenge with the pandemic, but I think you'll be very pleased with the product that her staff and the public have presented tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darcy.
Thank you. So as Warren mentioned, so we're talking about the housing element update tonight. So here we have an overview of what the presentation consists of. So for starters, at the end of last year, the city contracted with the company MIG to assist with updating the housing element. And Genevieve Sharrow has been the project manager from MIG. She's been working with us and doing a really great job at helping us navigate this whole process. So I'll kind of get us started, and then she'll be taking over the presentation. We're going to go over the involvement as well as with the Housing Constraints and Opportunities Committee. We've had various meetings with them, and the group was able to help us sort through different housing sites and programs in order to meet our housing needs with the next cycle. We'll discuss the housing element requirements, which are dictated by the Department of Housing and Community Development and their timeline that we're working under. We'll also go over some of the different ways that we've engaged the public throughout this process, including an earlier workshop that we had back in January and several meetings that we've had with the HCOC. Finally, we will dive into the draft housing element and discuss the regional housing needs for Paso Robles, including the programs that will help get us there, and then generally what our next steps are after tonight and what our timeline looks like for having the housing element certified by the end of this year. And lastly, we'll have time for some questions from the council and the commission, but we will also want to hear from the public during the public hearing component of tonight's study session, and we're hoping to get some really good feedback from everybody. So as you recall, City Council established the Housing Constraints and Opportunities Committee in 2015. They've done a really great job over the years in helping reduce barriers to housing development. And as we approached this update process, we knew that this group, as well as the attendees that go to the HCOC meetings, would be extremely helpful in making recommendations for which sites to consider in our housing inventory, as well as the programs that would be most impactful in helping to provide housing. So this group is made up of representatives from City Council, Planning Commission, housing developers, architects, builders, and advocates. And in total, we've had 4 meetings since January, And overall, they've been a great group to work with, some really great ideas. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Genevieve Sharrow. She's our housing element consultant. She'll be doing the rest of the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, Planning Commissioners, and the public. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. So tonight I'm going to go over, to start, some of the requirements of housing element law. The housing element is a general plan element, and it's required by the state legislature. It's the only general plan element that requires review and so-called certification by a state agency, and that is the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. I'll try and keep my alphabet soup to a minimum, but there are a few acronyms that pop up with housing element law that are a bit unavoidable, one of which is HCD, and the other is the second component, which Darcy also mentioned, which is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA, you'll hear me refer to. And the RHNA, it establishes a total number of housing units that each of the 7 cities and the county must plan for through this planning period for the housing element, which is between 2021 and 2028. So based on this adopted RHNA, each city and county has to update their housing element and show that the jurisdiction has capacity for that amount of housing units in their jurisdiction. So there's a very clear legislative intent associated with housing element law, that not only is housing of vital statewide importance, but that it's also incumbent on local and state governments to use their powers to facilitate the improvement and development of housing to accommodate all economic segments of the community. So to that end, periodic updates are required. So this update is an eight-year update, and it is due this December at the end of the year. If the city adopts the housing element on time, the housing element is valid for that 8-year period. If not, if the city fails to adopt on time, the housing element is only valid for 4 years, and a 4-year update is again required. And just to note, nothing has changed for deadlines due to the pandemic as of this point. So as Darcy mentioned, we kicked off the project back in January with a public workshop where participants discussed key challenges and opportunities for housing in Paso Robles. Participants at that meeting focused on the need to find some creative solutions for both financing affordable housing and to facilitate more housing in general, as well as the need for clarity and regulations to make sure that developers can get through the process smoothly and ways to streamline the process for development. We followed that up pretty quickly with a meeting with the Housing Constraints and Opportunities Commission, or the HCOC. The HCOC was convened to further discuss the issues and opportunities that were present in the community. This group at the first meeting stressed the need to be both realistic and creative with solutions, and focused also on a need to provide incentives. Certain ideas that came up at that meeting included thinking creatively about density and fractional units, reduced parking requirements, density bonus provisions, among others. In February, we reconvened to discuss currently approved projects that could count towards the RHNA, as well as potential other locations in town that could be used as housing sites to meet the RHNA. We discussed with this group sites that would score well for tax credit financing as a priority. And these were generally are on the west side due to existing transit and other services that are located there. In March, we convened again, and the group reviewed ways to provide additional surplus units. And some related assumptions about how to get those surplus units. So these surplus units refer to the allocation of potential units to various areas in the city that are articulated in the general plan land use element. So we discussed ways to use those fractional density units that were discussed in the first meeting to try and identify additional surplus units throughout the city. At the March meeting, we also reviewed case studies and best practices and concluded that the city should really prioritize methods that make it easier to build, provide incentives, and to support efforts to build a capital pool for affordable housing. We were not very stymied, but a little stymied by COVID-19 and met virtually in May after a hiatus of just 1 month to go through some of the key policies and programs that could be included in the housing element. So in addition, the group reviewed the draft projects and sites to meet the RHNA and identified a strategy to meet the RHNA. So with regard to the policies and programs, the group offered new ideas and reviewed all of the proposed recommendations and discussed largely changes to some specific zoning parameters and came to consensus on the programs that are included in this housing element. So I'd like to dive in and give kind of a medium level dive into the housing element and what it is. So the housing element really is a comprehensive statement by the community of its current and future housing needs and proposed actions or measures to facilitate the provision of additional housing to meet the needs for housing of all income levels in the community. So because of the significant legislation associated with the housing element, there is a focus on compliance with state law with regard to the different sections of the housing element and to a large extent the content. So the document's broken down into 7 main chapters. The first chapter is the introduction, where we review the document and all of the public input received to date, which resulted in the document. Chapter 2, the housing plan, the circle in the middle, is really the heart of the document. This is the goals and the policies, and importantly, the implementing programs that implement the housing vision. This is also a really core component of HCD's review, and we'll go over the most notable key policy changes that are associated with the housing plan tonight. Chapter 3 is the regional chapter, and this is unique to the San Luis Obispo County region. This is a regional vision for housing and collaboration that all of the jurisdictions in the county have included in their housing element. Chapter 4 is the needs assessment. This is a demographic review looking at housing trends and other facts from the census that help us understand the current situation for housing and for households in the community. Chapter 5 is a review of constraints to housing production. This includes both governmental and non-governmental constraints. So as far as governmental constraints, the law requires us to look at a variety of different parameters, including the specific zoning, development, use standards, permit processes and timeframes, as well as non-governmental constraints, including the market, environmental constraints, or infrastructure constraints. A lot of the constraints feed directly into the housing plan as ways to address those constraints. Chapter 6 is the resources and sites inventory chapter, and this is where the RHNA and how we meet the RHNA is housed. We look at sites to meet all income levels, as well as a variety of different administrative and financial resources to support housing goals. And then chapter 7, the final chapter, is a review of accomplishments towards meeting the goals of the last housing element. So each of these updates is kind of a cyclical process where cities look at how well they've met the goals in the past and what they'd like to carry forward, as well as new programs to consider. So I'll dig into the chapters that really have the most high level of HCD consideration and the ones that we spent the most time with the HCOC discussing and building. So first, the housing resources chapter. This is the heart of where we show that we can meet the regional housing needs allocation. So what is the RHNA, or the regional housing needs allocation? The state determines a regional housing need. This is a number of units for each regional council of government. So for San Luis Obispo region, the SLO-COG region, that was 10,810 units that are anticipated to be needed in the next 8-year period. So then SLO-COG works together to allocate those units to the various jurisdictions within the county. For Paso, this is 1,446 units that are anticipated to be needed between December 2018 and December 2020. So while the housing element period is 8 years, the RHNA period extends a little bit back. So it's actually a 10-year period back to December 2018. So SLO-COG divided the units based on an algorithm that made some assumptions about employment and housing to further jobs and housing balances throughout the county. And here's an allocation, the distribution of housing anticipated to be needed throughout the county. So in addition to the total number of units, that 1,446 is actually divided into 4 different income categories. And we often focus largely on the very low and low income categories, which totals here to 580. And the very low and low combined are often referred to the lower income categories. And we focus on this largely because the legislature requires it. A lot of the law is about the lower income categories. And because these are just the most difficult categories to actually meet and produce that type of affordable housing in most jurisdictions. So how do we achieve the RHNA? How do we show the state and how do we comply with state law that the city of Paso Robles has adequate capacity to meet the RHNA? We use 2 major things. First is the approved projects. So these are projects that have received approval since December 31st of 2018. So we're able to take credit, sometimes these are called credits, for projects that have been built or approved recently. And then we look at potential sites. In Paso Robles, we're looking at vacant sites, and generally we're looking at higher density sites for the lower income RHNA. So first on the approved projects, Paso Robles is able to meet a significant portion of the RHNA with approved projects, zeroing out the moderate and the above moderate income categories, and meeting a portion of the very low and low income RHNA as well. So the timing of how these are counted is based on the date of certificate of occupancy. So as you can see, Oak Park 3 and Oak Park 4 are both included in here. Oak Park 3 received their certificate of occupancy in 2019, and Oak Park 4 is now also complete. These units now are able to count towards the 6th cycle of the housing element, which is the one that we're heading into now. So the city is also able to make some assumptions about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and the rear yard duplexes in the Uptown Town Center specific plan area. The county completed a study that found that a portion of ADUs are offered below or at no rent to family members or other household employees. And so the county study found that a good assumption would be to use half of the ADUs, or the accessory dwelling units, towards the lower income category and half of those units towards the moderate income category. So generally the county is all following that same assumptions moving forward in their housing elements. And then rentals were also assumed to be available to the moderate income category based on the affordability thresholds for rentals in the area. So when we look at the kind of bottom line of all of these credits, the city is able to meet a significant portion of the RHNA and needs to find sites to accommodate the remaining 383 additional units. So when HCD reviews the sites, there are really 4 major parameters to indicate that it's suitable to meet the RHNA and has a high likelihood of actually developing as housing during the time period. First, if there's an existing use on the site, it's assumed that it'll be more difficult just to have a development occur rather than on a vacant site. The second is the size of the site. There's kind of a Goldilocks size of sites. Too small, has its constraints with development, certainly, and the law indicates that size is anything less than half an acre. And also too big is an impediment with land divisions and other constraints, and also financing for affordable housing projects, which generally do not exceed about 150 units. So that large size would be more than 10 acres. And then third, the realistic potential for recycling. Has there been a developer, or is the property owner interested in redevelopment, particularly with housing? And particularly, is there if there is a use on the site? That is important. And then finally, and importantly, what is the development density? So in state law, there is an assumption that higher density sites are able to support affordable housing and lower income housing in a way that lower density sites cannot, due to economies of scale. So in Paso Robles, that density is assumed to be 20 units to the acre that can facilitate lower income housing. So the housing element identifies vacant sites that best meet the HCD criteria to meet the RHNA. There are certainly additional sites throughout town that may develop with housing throughout the planning period, and are, certainly great sites as well that are not mentioned in this housing element. North Chandler, many other areas of town. But we wanted to focus HCD's review on these sites for a number of reasons. One, to ease the administrative burden to some extent on the review of this housing element, as well as moving forward, as staff will need to track these sites throughout the planning period to see what's developing on them. And there's also some precedence with future RHNA allocations being based, at least in some part, on previous inventories and surpluses highly in excess of the allocated RHNA. So we want to be conservative with the site's inventory and present, the very best sites that meet state law requirements to accommodate the RHNA. So the site's inventory consists of high density sites on the west side, medium density sites on the west and the east side, and the proposed development site, the Beechwood specific plan, which is currently in review process. So the current proposal for Beechwood is included in the site's inventory as a site because it's still in process. And it reflects the current proposal with 100 apartment units identified as moderate, because we're identifying all rentals in Paso generally within that category and affordability threshold. And Beechwood has also allowed 41 accessory dwelling units, and that is divided evenly, as I indicated before, between low and moderate income categories. We also reviewed applications for ADUs in 2019 and projected forward a similar amount over the next 9 years, I guess, because it was 2019 numbers. And again, those are divided between the low and moderate income categories. So the vacant sites, as indicated, the vacant high density sites can meet the lower income RHNA. Vacant moderate density sites are applied to meet the moderate income RHNA. So with these sites, there is a modest surplus of sites to meet the RHNA and comply with state law. So now for the housing plan, the heart of the document. Building on the site's inventory, the first program in the housing element is to accommodate adequate sites. The city can accommodate the RHNA with the current zoning and the sites that are identified in the housing element, using the vacant high density sites to assume where lower income sites could occur, and moderate income sites on medium density, ADU potential, and the proposed development site at Beechwood. The second program pertains to a state law that is called the No Net Loss Law. Cities throughout the planning period are required to track the housing sites that we include in the housing element. So as projects are proposed on these sites, certain findings have to be made. So, for example, if a site is identified in the housing element sites inventory and it currently is mixed use, and it would allow commercial or residential development, and a commercial development comes in. The city would need to track that and make sure that there are adequate other sites to accommodate the remaining RHNA moving forward. Similarly, this law was changed to also require that if a housing development comes in and we've identified that site for the lower income category, but it develops with a market rate development, the city also needs to make findings that adequate sites still exist. So there needs to be adequate sites within the inventory or other sites that have been identified that they can show can meet the RHNA. So through the process of working with the HCOC, there are a number of additional sites that were discussed and are included in those materials that the city can go back to use as those surplus sites. So this program indicates that the city will comply with this requirement. Program 6 refers to the mixed use overlay. The city has a current mixed use overlay, and this was one of the topics of discussion with the HCOC. Some of the potential areas in town that could be re-examined that currently do not allow residential but have high level of potential for residential to really invigorate some vacant commercial pads and other opportunities. So the group discussed it and recommended that the mixed use overlay be modified to provide a bit more flexibility than it currently has, to increase the density from 20 to 30 units to the acre, and also to allow for the flexibility that within this mixed use overlay, it doesn't necessarily have to be a vertical kind of mixed use product. It could be a standalone residential development or a standalone commercial or a mix to provide that flexibility to the developer. In addition, it's recommended that the mixed use overlay be applied to 2 sites over at Woodland Plaza. These are both currently vacant areas that also showed very well with regard to the tax credit financing and how they would score with potential access to transit and services. Another measure brought forward by the HCOC, as I mentioned before, was the introduction of fractional density units. So this mirrors the methodology that San Luis Obispo uses. This program is really intended to encourage smaller unit sizes. So these are, encouraging more affordable by design because the units are smaller. So each unit, if it is smaller than 600 square feet, would be considered half of a unit only for the purposes of calculating density. A unit that is 600 to 1,000 square feet, a 1-bedroom, could be considered 2/3 of a unit, but anything that's larger than that would be considered a full unit. So the land use element, as I mentioned before, I discussed the surplus units that the HCOC discussed earlier. And the land use element identifies potential new units in various areas throughout Paso Robles. This table shows assumptions of how the fractional density units would result in additional surplus units that could be allocated in town. So because a portion of the new multifamily units would be small and less than 1 density unit, there will be a delta of a potential new 345 surplus units in the city. And this was calculated based on assumptions about how many of each type of housing unit would occur in both the east and the west sides of the city based on previous experience in the city. So we were conservative in these assumptions because it's assumed that this would further encourage smaller unit sizes. So the surplus allocation, the surplus units, is not actually included in the housing element. It is a result of the program for fractional units, but that would be a land use element change that would be forthcoming later in the year. When that change does occur, the HCOC did discuss some of the allocation considerations that the city could develop criteria for to really advance the city's housing priorities and appropriately allocate those surplus units. especially based on affordable and workforce housing that's provided on a project, where it's located in town for how well it scores for tax credits, if it's providing, high level of amenities for the community in terms of public open spaces, transportation demand management with a mode shift away from cars, or other community serving uses like art and education. Programs 3 and 10 are largely related to updates to state law and making the city's zoning ordinance comply with state law. Both an update to the ADU ordinance and the density bonus ordinance update are currently slated to be completed by the city with SB2 grant funding. With regard to the ADU ordinance update, in addition to complying with state law, the HCOC proposed reduced parking requirements for ADUs in the Uptown Town Center specific plan area, largely to mirror anything that's in state law, but only limited to within a half mile of transit, to spread that out to the entire specific plan area. With regard to the density bonus ordinance, also to comply with state law, we do know that certainly there's multiple laws that are moving through the legislature with regard to the density bonus, largely with regard to moderate income categories. So the intent really is to update the ordinance to comply with state law, but the HCOC also discussed the way that concessions are interpreted is often different in different jurisdictions, and to be able to consolidate certain concessions in density bonus law would facilitate affordable housing development and streamline their review. So that was recommended for including that as well in a density bonus ordinance update. Program 13 calls the city to adopt objective design standards in the zoning ordinance. This would also be funded with SB2 funds. Current state law makes it somewhat difficult for cities to make discretionary review decisions for housing projects, certainly through 2025. So the objective design standards become a way that cities can ensure more high quality development with regard to particular requirements for architecture, site design, parking, and landscaping. As the objective design standards are crafted, it'll be important to make sure that they encourage a variety of housing types and not force a certain type of kind of wedding cake or cookie cutter type housing. Program 14 is another law intended to implement state law. AB 2162 requires supportive housing to be considered a use by right in all multifamily and mixed use zoning districts, and also has some additional parameters about how parking can be permitted, as well as how quickly the review for that type of project needs to be done. AB 101 requires that so-called low barrier navigation centers be a by right use, so non-discretionary use in areas that are zoned for mixed use and non-residential zoning districts that permit multifamily uses. So this type of use provides temporary room and board with limited barriers, so allowing pets or family to live together, and to connect homeless individuals and families to income, public benefits, health services, and eventually permanent shelter. Program 15 consolidates a number of potential zoning ordinance amendments that were discussed with the HCOC. The first is with regard to building height in the multifamily R zone, so R2 through R5. The current code sets the maximum height limit both in terms of feet and in terms of stories. And so this would keep the height limit in terms of feet only, but provide the flexibility with regard to the number of stories that can fit within that number of feet. With regard to the community room or the daycare center, current projects with more than 32 units are required to provide this, and this would remove that requirement to facilitate just more flexibility for development. Within the R3 zone, this would revise the the density to just clarify that if it meets a minimum lot size, 3 units are allowed on that property. So the HCOC discussed what that minimum lot size should be to make sure that it's not too small. So that would be reflected in the zoning ordinance update. And then with regard to manufactured housing, this is really just a cleanup one to modify definitions of mobile home and manufactured housing and modular home, all of those, just to make it clear between the various parts of the zoning code that you're in compliance with state law. Program 16 is with regard to one particular parcel that is actually included in the housing element sites inventory. It's a moderate density site. This particular property has some specific zoning language in the code, as well as associated with a 1995 CUP and development plan that reduce and restrict the density, even though it's zoned R3. So this program would be to consider an amendment to those stipulations that really constrain the development on this property to more match what the R3 zoning district intent is. And then finally, the other notable housing program that we discussed with the HCOC was to revise the Planning Commission threshold of review for development plans, which are currently at 5 or more units. It was discussed with the HCOC to consider increasing this to 10 units or 20 units to really facilitate and streamline smaller projects that may not require the same level of discretionary approval and review, and just to move it through the process more quickly at the director level, but still have site plan review and the same process, but avoid the public hearing to move the process along a bit more quickly. So that's a number of zoning ordinance amendments. The focus of the constraint section really does feed right into how do we adjust those and modify the zoning ordinance, and what can the city do to accommodate the housing, the arena, and also move those constraints aside with changes to the zoning ordinance. So the funding sources available to the city to accommodate those include SB2 to accommodate some of those. The LEAP grant also the city has submitted an application for, as well as the REAP grant coming forward could be a funding source to help the city complete those zoning text amendments. Chapter 3, as I mentioned, is the regional vision. This is a chapter that focuses on strengthening regional collaboration, and is the same chapter included in all of the jurisdictions, the 7 cities and the county, looking at ways to foster collaboration, address existing housing issues and infrastructure issues, and commitment to improve the jobs housing balance throughout the region. So just a review of the timeline, we have been working pretty steadily throughout the winter and spring to develop the housing element with the HCOC and the public, and are here tonight to reveal the culmination of that input and work process. The intent of the workshop tonight is to get feedback from both the Planning Commission, City Council, and the public on what should really be in this housing element before it goes up to the HCD for their review. When we send this up to HCD after this meeting, we do hope that it is in its very close to final format. HCD hopes that they assume that this has been blessed by decision makers, and so that changes are not coming forward afterwards, which could result in additional rounds of review if it happens after that. So this will go up to HCD for their review after this body reviews it tonight, and we make any according changes that are directed. The HCD has 60 days to review the document, and we'll work hand in hand with them to make revisions throughout the document to comply with state law and their interpretations of state law. And the city will also be completing an environmental analysis in the fall at the same time. And then this will be brought forward back to the Planning Commission and City Council for their consideration in late 2020, prior to the December deadline. So that completes my presentation, and I am available for questions.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have anything else from staff before we go to questions?
We're ready for questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. So I will hand the meeting over to Planning Commission Chairperson Jorgensen so that she can do the questioning for the Planning Commission.
Thank you. And that was a very helpful presentation. Appreciate it very much. All right, I'd like to call on Commissioner Kogler for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, all. I actually been involved with this since January, and more recently, I think as of April, as one of the members of the HCOC, so I'm quite familiar with it. And I saw it in a bunch of pieces, it's fair to say, along the way. And I'm very impressed with the assembly process that staff and the consultants have gone through to make this a very, I think, well done and coherent plan. I have one relatively simple question, and it involves the Navigation Center, the Homeless Navigation Center. It's referenced twice in the document, once on page 34 and again on page 49. The first reference makes it sound as though, well, it specifically states that the project was halted indefinitely and the ending essentially the agreement with ECHO. The subsequent reference in the document sounds more positive. It sounds like they're still proceeding to pursue this, ECHO being the case. And I'm wondering, which is it, or is it both? Is that project really not going to occur, or is there still some effort to breathe life into it?
So I think, Commissioner Kogler, it's kind of both are currently the situation. The project is on hold, but we are actively looking for alternatives. We know this is kind of one of the pieces that's going to evolve over the next couple months. When we bring this back for final hearings, we expect that we'll have that language clarified by then.
Great, thank you very much. That's all, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Commissioner Kogler was on the HCOC, so I'm quite familiar and must compliment our staff and consultants on a great job. I have no questions at this moment.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Christensen, do you have questions?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the amount of units, if that can be brought back up. I was a little unclear of a couple things there. If we could go back to that about the surplus units and. Okay, thank you. Maybe one slide before that. I'm sorry, maybe 2 slides before that. It had the number of 383, and I was a little unclear how we got to that. There, oh, there it is. So I guess my question is, it went so fast, I didn't get a good chance to look at it. So the way I'm understanding it is that we have, there seems to be a reading demand for additional very low and low income housing. Is that the way I'm reading that? And I'm oversimplifying it, but is that the way I'm reading it?
Correct. So the city has been able to accommodate the moderate and the above moderate income RHNAs with projects that have been approved, as well as a portion of the RHNA for the very low and low. But there does remain the 383 units that are in the lower income categories that the city would need to accommodate. So this is accommodated, though, by identifying sites with high enough density that they could facilitate affordable housing on those sites.
Okay, so with that, then, so I'm understanding as well that the uptown area, which I think it has 900 and some odd already allocated, this is outside of the scope of that. Is that correct?
This is within the scope of that. So
I see.
This is within the scope of what the city's existing general plan and uptown specific plan would allow for.
Okay, thank you. And then so to clarify, with the Beechwood specific plan coming into place, How does that interplay with these specific units, these 383 units that you've mentioned here? Can you kind of maybe help me with that?
Yes, absolutely. So those were a significant portion of the Beechwood specific plan was a significant portion of how we accommodated the market rate and the moderate income categories. So those are included and counted as well as sites. We didn't count them as credits. So earlier on, we showed credits for all of the things built. We didn't count, this is just a technicality. We didn't count them there because it's not been approved. We can't be for sure about it. So we counted it over here in the sites. But they do help meet the RHNA, just the above moderate and moderate income RHNA. And then with regard to the ADUs that could be there, those do help meet a portion of the lower and moderate income RHNAs as well.
Okay, thank you. So basically, essentially, and I'm just going to summarize this and tell me if I'm correct. The amount of units we have yet to fulfill to satisfy what you're going to submit for the RHNA is 383 units. And that's what we need to satisfy as a city over the next 8 years. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Very close to. So what we are showing in the housing element is how those 383 units can be accommodated within the city's existing zoning. And so we identify these pink and orange and purple sites show how we will accommodate those 383 units through existing zoning. So this is not to say that all of these sites will specifically develop. Another site somewhere else might develop, and the city can meet that 383 through those sites. There are no current penalties to not building that 383, although legislation is constantly changing. But currently there is no penalty because the city does not have control over the private sector and their development of private property.
Right, so I get it. So you're proposing the areas that you feel we can satisfy the 383 units with. I'm just I guess I'm just trying to simplify it for my slow brain tonight. Overall, we have 383 units that we'd like to satisfy as a city, and you're proposing the sites that you feel we can do that with. But however, they could be used in other areas, say if there's a higher density downtown on the west side or other development occurs as we have currently. So, okay, exactly. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I have no further questions, Madam Chairwoman.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gibson, questions?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to circle back around to the ADU. So my understanding in reading the report is that our ADU portion of the element was last updated in 2005. So could staff please let me know what the time frame is for our ADU element to be updated?
Sure. So we've applied for the SB2 funds, and we're anticipating to move forward with updating our ADU ordinance essentially the beginning of next year. So once we complete the housing element update.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So just so I'm trying to gather some understanding in regards to the ADU, because as in the slide that's up in front of us now, it was indicated that one of the ways that we believe that we're going to achieve the 383 units, or basically to help achieve meeting the housing needs for the low and perhaps even very low residents in our city, is building ADUs. So what is the ordinance or rules by which we would assure ourselves that the ADUs that are being built are actually end up being used or allocated for the people in those income designations and not for somebody, say, in the moderate?
So the way that the HCD allows us to make these assumptions, it assumes that, one, the recent, so state law supersedes whatever the city's current zoning ordinance says, if it is not in compliance with state law, and that state law continues to change, and there is always new legislation. Even right now, there's new legislation about how to further encourage ADUs and especially affordable ADUs. But there is not a clear requirement for these units to be affordable. These are assumptions that HCD guidance allows us to use. So we're following that guidance with regard to assumptions. But certainly some of these might be totally free and fall into the extremely or very low income category, essentially because a family member's living there, or they might be market rate. But we kind of split the difference with assumptions between the low and the moderate income categories.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your answers. That's all the questions I have this time.
All right, thank you. And I do have a couple of questions. On program 18, it has to do with the Planning Commission threshold of review for multifamily. Is that, does that refer only to the Uptown specific plan area?
This does not. This would be for any development plan that the zoning code currently requires planning commission review for 5 or more units. So any development plan is the way that it's currently proposed.
All right, thank you. And how is that number doubled? What was the thought behind that?
Yeah, we had some discussion with the HCOC about this. The intent was, especially given some of the current state laws with really encouraging more streamlined review and less discretion with regard to housing developments. So because cities are not able to deny the project or reduce the density, the intent is really to just help facilitate these smaller projects. And so that discussion was had with the HCOC, and the group did feel like 20 was too high. So we were kind of taking the temperature there, but felt fairly comfortable that with 10 units, it could be a decent threshold. And I believe we also included something to go back and check on this one. That was important to the HCOC. So there's a reevaluation within a year or two to make sure it's working okay.
All right, thank you. How are housing units, existing housing units in the city that have licenses for short-term rental, how are they counted in the existing housing stock inventory?
It's an interesting question. And I actually started to have this discussion with HCD, and they also said, that's an interesting question. This is a new topic, I think, that hasn't been addressed. It's not addressed in the legislature. It is not currently indicated in how we identify existing units. The city will need probably to track it moving forward on the housing sites that exist in the housing element. So if, for instance, we identified a site in the housing element for very low or low income housing, and it turns into all short-term rentals in some way, that would need to be something that the city tracked and identified alternative sites for. But with regard to the existing housing stock, that's not something that's readily tracked or required to be tracked through the housing element process.
All right, and then my last question, can you elaborate a bit on where Paso Robles sort of fits in the regional housing analysis? Because I understand from what you've said that we're part of a region, the San Luis Obispo County. How are other 8 entities doing on their credits? Are we, I mean, it seems like we're doing quite well overall. Are we, how are others doing? I'm just curious as to, we're providing the opportunity through Olson Chandler and whatever may be approved in the future for significant housing growth. And I'm just wondering what the rest of the county is doing in proportion. I'm not looking for actual numbers, just a kind of a take the temperature on that.
Sure. So I'm also working with the city of Atascadero. So Paso Robles and Atascadero chose to work together on the housing element update to make sure that they could find economies of scale and really work collaboratively on it. So I can tell you a little bit about Atascadero in particular. They were also able to meet a significant portion of their regional need with credits for units built. They have a number of large projects that were able to accommodate a portion, most of their above moderate and a portion of their lower income as well. So I think with regard to Atascadero, you're pretty close, although they haven't quite kept up in sheer numbers, but percentage-wise, they are comparable as well. And there's also the state tracks how each jurisdiction is accommodating its RHNA through the planning period. So certainly you're only a year and a half into the RHNA period of a 10-year period. So there's a lot of fluidity that could happen in the next 8.5 years. But the state does track for the purposes of SB 35, which requires streamlining for certain projects. And that's based on how much of your RHNA is accommodated. And Paso Robles sits with the majority of jurisdictions in the state on that list. There's only a few that have met their low and very low income RHNAs that sit in a different list. It's a much smaller list. Does that answer your question?
Partly.
Sorry.
You don't have any knowledge, ready knowledge about the cities to the south in our county?
I do not. They have not put out their draft housing elements with the exception of the county, I believe. So that one's available, and we can take a look at what the county's done.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I believe that is the end of our questions from the Planning Commission.
Madam Chairwoman, this is Commissioner Christensen. If you don't mind, I have one follow-up question for staff. Just off of the ADU, I'm kind of circling back because Commissioner Gibson brought up a question that kind of triggered something. Staff, I was just wondering, maybe Warren can answer this, but how has the city, what are we seeing as a city for applications for ADUs? And do you have kind of a sense of what's been coming across the desk? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, so those actual assumptions that Genevieve had up on the screen of being able to produce 400 over a 10-year period, that's actually based on our historic production over the last couple of years. So we've been doing 20 to 30 per year. So we're pretty comfortable that even under our existing ADU ordinance, which is a little dated, that it's still producing quite a few units. We think as we do the updates, we can probably improve that production rate.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, Mr. Mayor, we'll turn the meeting back over to you.
Very good, thank you. Let's go now to the city council members and questions of staff and our presenter, starting off with Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions I had written down was numbers for the South Chandler and Olson specific plan. Weren't they having to include low and very low site inventory in their projects? And they weren't really listed here. So we're talking about Beechwood, but I'm thinking now of this South Chandler Olson. Was there anything there? As I remember, wasn't there an offer in the DA, the development agreement, to have some of those in there?
Yeah, there's actually some options that are in the development agreement that actually would produce more affordable units than shown on this table. We've taken the most conservative approach in terms of what we want to promise to HCD, and we know that through the development agreements, we're likely to actually produce additional units, but we didn't want to promise them because it really ties our hands. So that's kind of why some of those units that may be possible through the development agreement, same thing with Beechwood, don't actually show up in those tables, but we still intend to build those units.
Got it. Yeah, okay. Like an ace in the hole if we need it. But the other question, and Roberta kind of touched on it too, was the threshold, from 5 to 10 units. Is it 10 units or more than that the Plan Commission would hear the review, or staff is from 0 to 9 units? I'm not quite sure.
So 1 through 10 units would be staff approval. Basically, well, it's site plan review, so that's DRC, honestly, that's approving that with staff. Then 11 and greater would then go DRC and then finally to Planning Commission for final approval.
Okay, yeah, because it said 10 plus, so I wasn't quite sure on the number there. And then what if the applicant disagreed, and what kind of a policy would he have for appeal if it was held just for staff?
So any decision at staff level is always appealable to Planning Commission, and all Planning Commission decisions are appealable to council.
Council, got it. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Strong.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I have some questions, but I want to compliment the staff on the fact that over the last 10-year period for arena numbers, we were the only city in this county that met the low income requirement. So that was a plus. And right now, it looks like we've already approved enough to meet just about everything except our low and moderate income. But the one thing I didn't see addressed in here and I'm wondering about is anyone who gets that density bonus or other benefits by doing the low income, where is it in there that we have either a deed restriction or CC&Rs requiring a 30-year freeze on the value of that and what it can be sold for, so that it stays in that particular category for that full 30-year period as required by the state?
So that would be one of the updates that will happen as part of the density bonus ordinance. So that's an implementation measure of the housing element.
Is there any place that we're going to reference it, at least in this document, so that the state can see that that's where we're going?
We can absolutely add that.
I think that might be wise, just to get us through the state more reasonably. Okay, and then also, are we going to have any method in there to defer some of their initial permit costs in order to help reduce that as one of the benefits available to them for doing it? That was a question.
So I could probably weigh in on that. So as you'll recall, the Housing Constraints Committee actually spent the last 4 years looking through all our fees, especially with multifamily, trying to figure out how to address that issue. So we have reduced our development impact fees significantly based on that. We've reduced fees for the small fractional units that Genevieve mentioned already. We also defer the fees until final occupancy. That also includes the utility connections now. So we believe between the combination of those programs that we've addressed that issue already.
Okay, are we doing that either through Melrose or else one of the other programs now offered by the state to do the similar thing?
No, we're not.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia?
Yes, sir. I had a question on the ADUs. When we went to one of our conferences, there was people there with kind of like a how to build an ADU. And do we as a city offer something like that if a homeowner came and asked that like they wanted information? Do we have something to offer them, or do they have to come to you with everything already, plans and everything in hand?
So that's kind of referring to like template designs or pre-approved stock plans. So
Correct.
Currently we don't have those right now for ADUs. The county's talking about doing that program. As that moves forward, we'll be able to take advantage of those stock plans that the county's planning on producing.
And also on the ADUs, so because I've had residents come and ask, their lots are the bigger lots like on the west side, and they ask on the ADUs, so if an ADU, depending on the zoning, of course, because the west side can be used for mixed use, if they build an ADU on their lot and they come to the city and say they intentionally are building it, but they're going to use it for short-term rental, so that would not count towards the arena numbers, correct? Or how does that work?
So under state law now, you cannot use an ADU as a short-term rental.
Okay.
So now in the uptown zone, you could build often a duplex or a second unit that's not an ADU. So it would be very important in terms of how they applied for the permit. There's different fees involved.
Right.
So there's some choices to be made. We spend a lot of time trying to explain what the rules are. So there would be two ways to do it in the uptown zone. One would restrict short-term rental, the other wouldn't. So that's kind of one of those things that'll be a decision on the property owner to make.
But so if they use it as a short-term rental and they pay for all those fees, then it would not count as an arena number? Or does it still count?
Well, it wouldn't as an ADU. It might as just a general multifamily unit, but then it would probably just be in the above moderate category. So it would be a unit, but it wouldn't be one of the affordable units that we're depending on.
Okay. And then I had the same question about the application. So you already answered that you're seeing about 20 to 30 per year on that. Let's see, what else did I have here? I think that's all I have. All my questions have already been asked. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilman Gregory.
Okay, yeah, I've got a couple questions. In the inventory for locations for potential low-income housing, the Penny store was mentioned several times during the meetings with the Housing Constraints Committee. Is that still part of the inventory?
So that is included not to meet the RENA, but as one of your backup sites. It certainly could be included to meet the RENA. We're just trying to keep it clean because there is a rezoning that has to occur in conjunction with the housing element update. Timing is a little tricky, so it's listed, it's included in the housing element under the sites section. It's just kind of like, it's called a candidate site to meet the RENA, that it's not one of the sites to meet the RENA, it's extra. But that the program to apply the mixed use overlay to the Penny site and the other vacant site on the other side of River Road is included in the housing element.
Okay, and then maybe Warren, you could help me with this. So how do we deal with all these new units wanting to build in the low and very low and moderate income on the west side? How do we do that for available permits? What are permits available to do this?
Yeah, so the west side, the uptown specific plan was allocated 989 units under the general plan. We've only basically permitted a fraction of this at this point. So we believe at our current rates, there's about 20 years of capacity in the uptown area under the current general plan.
So what about on the east side? Is there anything available on the east side for building?
So in terms of doing general plan amendments where we have to find new units to do general plan amendments on the east side, Genevieve, why don't you go to that surplus density exhibit? So you'll recall, Mr. Gregory, that we've exhausted that current supply of surplus density units. So basically by going through the fractional unit calculations, we have the potential to create another 345 surplus density units that then the council could allocate as they see fit anywhere in town. The J.C. Penney site would be one of the sites where we would need some of those to move that rezoning ahead.
And so, Warren, along with that question, so I'll probably ask some more questions later about the fractional units. But if in the situation where we're not able to use all the units on the west side for this purpose of low-income units, is there a process for us to use those on the east side as well?
So these 340 fractional units, if we go through and create those, they can be used anywhere in town. It'll be up to the council on how to allocate it. We'll probably have some policies that would encourage them to be used for more affordable projects rather than market rate projects, but the council will have full discretion on exactly how to allocate those units.
And then according to the maps, most of the sites for multifamily or low-income units are on the west side as it is, correct?
Yeah, but as Genevieve said, all those have existing zoning, so we don't need to use any surplus units on any of those sites. Those are sites that under the existing zoning could build out at that 20 units per acre.
Okay. All right, good. And then I had another question about, so currently if homeowners are able to go ahead and construct ADUs at this time under our current policy, is that true?
Yeah, so under the state law, all single-family zones, you're entitled to build both an ADU and a junior ADU. Fees are waived for those, for utility connections, impact fees, and that's why we've seen quite an uptick in ADU production over the last couple of years.
And my other question is a comment that came at the very end on the ADUs is, what is it in the new ordinance that would make it easier for people to build ADUs?
Well, we don't think there's any significant hangups, but it doesn't hit all the current state rules. So I think just a rewrite of it will make it more user-friendly. So I'm not exactly sure if there's any significant barriers we're going to be addressing, but we will be able to make it more user-friendly. If we have the template designs from the county as well, I think all those will be helpful to homeowners that are thinking about building these in terms of moving forward.
And one final question, and maybe Darcy could help me with this one. On the ADUs themselves, to be in the category of very low or low income, is it the size of the AD, the location of the ADU? What makes it very low or low income for ADUs?
So the way that we're justifying that to the county, we worked with the other cities. This was part of the regional approach. We actually had a market study done of all the existing ADUs within the county. And based on that market study, it was determined that half of them would be low income and half of them would be moderate income, just based on their design, and there would be no need for any deed restriction. So it's basically kind of the affordable by design approach. So based on ADUs having to be smaller, having to be rental units, just that mix alone will produce both moderate and low income units.
So that's regulated almost by statistics, and that's good. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions on my own behalf. We've heard questions from the Planning Commission and from the City Council. We're going to open up the public hearing portion of this. We have a couple of people in queue already. If you've been listening and would like to make public comment, the number to call is 805-865-7276. The first person I have on my list is Mr. David Cook. Mr. Cook is a member of the Housing Constraints and Opportunities Committee. Are you with us, sir?
Mayor Martin, he is not on the line at this moment.
Very good. The second person I have online is Larry Werner, also a member of the committee. Larry, are you with us?
I'm here. Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, I just want to say that the presentation tonight was excellent after having read the housing element update, which is a multi-page document, as you all know. But and a little bit, overwhelming in terms of all the things it covers. But the presentation tonight was a very nice summary of the important points of the housing element. And I started out by thinking I want to thank everyone who is involved, and I started making a list of Darcy, who's done the legwork on this, and Warren and Darren and all the council, and really came to the realization that it's by together that we have accomplished this. And that makes me very proud of our city, that we can work so well together and have a meeting like tonight where we go through these challenges and commitments. And I'm just very pleased that we are all together on this. And just to give an aside to this, I have a conference call tomorrow with the city of Morro Bay, and they are trying to improve their planning process, their permitting process, and they have asked me to represent the city of Paso Robles because they have very high respect for the accomplishments that have occurred over the last 4 or 5 years in the city of Paso Robles to make development more friendly, and the timing for getting project approved shortened. And I'm very proud that they have asked us to give them advice. So I want to say thank you to everyone who is listening right now, because Paso Robles is a special place, and together we are going to make it even more amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And do we have anyone else on the list? I don't have one on my screen.
Yes, Mayor Martin. David Cook is on the line now.
David Click. David, are you with us?
Yes.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good evening. I'm Mr. Mayor and city council members. So my name is Dave Cook from the Paso Robles Housing Authority. I just wanted to make a few comments on the presentation of the housing element tonight. And I'd like to acknowledge Genevieve from MIG and the city staff for putting together an amazing draft of the housing element. There's so much information and numbers that you have to gather, and it all come into like 120-page document. It's pretty amazing. So I thank them for doing all that. And I was privileged to be HCOC member, and I thought we had a great collaborative group, like Larry mentioned a little bit. City council members, planning commissioning members. We had some, county legislation, people there, real estate developers and public members. And they were all well versed in, development and housing, and particularly knew Paso Robles, very well. And then the group had like very, very good conversations on all aspects of the housing element, as Genevieve presented us, tonight, along with identifying some of the highlights of identifying some developable lots, throughout Paso that we probably didn't know existed before. And we also looked at some creative zoning overlays, for possible, commercial into other mixed use and possible residential uses. And we discussed density bonuses, at length, and the impact on that, and tried to look at some streamlining ways to get through the planning through Paso. So overall, I think the draft of the housing element is very thorough, well thought out, and I think it'll serve the Paso Robles community well into for the next 8 years. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate your work on this issue too. Anyone else in the queue?
Yes, sir. Jeff Carr.
Thank you. Jeff, welcome.
Yes, hi, Jeff Carr at Paso Robles. I wanted to say I appreciated the one commissioner that asked to go back to the chart. I believe it's called site inventory, because I didn't quite get that all either. But one point in particular, is it implying with the references to Beechwood that all the Beechwood inventory, the 911 units for moderate and market level, that those are all surplus units with respect to the RENA, that they aren't meeting any RENA need? Is that what I'm picking up off that chart?
We'll get the answer for that for you. Do you have any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else online?
Yes, sir. The next caller is Vince Vanderlip.
Very good. Vince, welcome.
Good evening, Council and Planning Commission. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Hello? Oh, okay. Very good. Well, I sat on the HCOC as well, and I worked with every staff and with the consultant there. And I just did want to say, too, as Larry said, Ruin did a great job. So my hat's off to everybody. I would like to say, though, most of the time and I had a short discussion with City Manager Frucci in our last meeting at the very end of it, And sometimes these things, the main job number one is compliance, and I've got that, and that's what we need to do is have state compliance, state law. However, I'm hoping that we can at some point take this to the next step and implement this and actually have housing across all boards, including market level housing and low income housing. So I would just like to maybe urge to the council to maybe just direct staff and maybe the HCOC to look at some further incentives to actually bring this plan to fruition. Because as we know, all we can do at this point is allocate this. And nobody can force private industry to do anything. However, as a city, I think we can locally provide some sort of incentives, even locally, or try to find grants from outside sources to actually bring not only market level housing, but even more importantly, workforce housing and affordable housing. So possibly we could take the next step over the next couple of years and have the HCOC and staff work together to even take this a further step down the line. So thank you very much to everybody.
Very good, and thank you for your comments. Who else do we have waiting?
That is all.
Very good. We have no one else on the line for public comment. I'm going to close public comment, bring it back. We did have one question. If we could ask our consultant, please, about the Beechwood units. I believe the question was, are they surplus for the purpose of calculating satisfying RENA standards?
Yes, so that is a good point. They are in excess of what is needed to meet the RENA. The RENA can be met because you had also just approved the Olson South Chandler project. It was met with those credits. So the Beechwood plan is surplus beyond what's required for the RENA.
Very good. Thank you for that. And obviously the comment about further incentives, I fully anticipate as time goes on, we're going to consider those things. And just a comment on the comment about the inquiry from Morro Bay. I've also received inquiries from people who are starting this process in Morro Bay, kind of picking my brain about how we did this. So I think it's really a plum for the committee members who have worked so hard over the years to gather all this information and put it into a logical plan and get us to this point this evening. So that's really, really great. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over now to Chairperson Jorgensen for Planning Commission comments and suggestions for refinements. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's go in the same order. Commissioner Kogler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No further comments at this time.
All right, Commissioner Neal.
Just a couple. I'm a big fan of the fractional unit idea. I think that will allow us to, by design, have more affordable units in the city. And then I also noticed that Mr. Kogler took over for, Commissioner Kogler took over for Commissioner Donaldson when he left the commission. So maybe we can add him to the HCOC membership. That's it for me. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Christensen.
I think at this time, I really don't have any other comments but I do really appreciate the report. And I think it's put it a lot better into perspective, at least for myself, since I wasn't involved directly with it. I would like to say that hopefully we can come to terms and help find, help builders and property owners to develop out these very low or low income locations. And that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gibson.
I'd like to echo some of the comments that this report was very detailed and informative, especially for somebody like myself who is relatively recent to the Planning Commission. And I would applaud all the people that have worked on this and as staff. There's obviously been a lot of work and good progress has been made in the last few years in the city. I would just echo Mr. Vanderlip's comment that I think the more of the challenge or the opportunity is going to be in the implementation of this down the road, and how we accomplish that is probably going to have a lot more bearing on how effective we are in our housing. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gibson. And I just have two very small comments. I concur that this is extreme amount of data and planning, and to go through it and have the understanding that I think most all of us have gotten shows that it is presented so logically and as clear as something this complex can be. So I appreciate very much the work that's been done. I have two comments, one of which is particularly small, but I just have to put it out there for consideration, perhaps, as the final draft is prepared. And that is back to the Program 18 and the Planning Commission threshold of review for multifamily units. I'm not sure that at the scale that many of our developments in our city are made, that 10 units wouldn't be kind of large without Planning Commission review. And I'm looking at that from the point of view of the surrounding neighbors and making sure that they are really represented and have a chance to really understand what's going to be happening in their neighborhood. And my only other comment is, again, I'm repeating myself a little bit, but back to the short-term rentals. And I do totally understand that there are very specific requirements for what is to be included in the housing element. And I'm not suggesting that we provide information we don't need, because we don't want that to go to the state and then start off on get out in the weeds on that. So I appreciate that. But as we progress with this, just to keep in mind that short-term rentals are, maybe somehow to just keep in mind that they do affect the available sale and rental stock in our city. And also just it was mentioned specifically in the report that Paso Market Walk had added 6 residential units in a mixed use, and those are short-term rentals. So that's it. It's a tremendous amount of work, and I thank everybody involved. And I believe that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Chairwoman, Commissioner Christensen, one last thing. I do want to echo, I do agree with you. The threshold is a concern for me as well. I meant to say that before, and I apologize. I passed right over my own notes, so I wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. A question for staff and then back to the chairperson. The process for actually recommending refinements, we're going to have at least one here that I've written down already. Is this something that the council is going to have the final say on? Are we going to do a sort of a joint poll of the council and the planning commission? What's the process for moving that forward?
I think, Mr. Mayor, you've kind of got the final authority on it. We are looking for consensus direction. Whatever changes we make to this document, as Genevieve mentioned, go to HCD. And once HCD's review's done, we're not going to be in a position to be making further changes. So we really are looking for consensus from as many of the decision makers as possible tonight.
So what I would suggest, and Chairperson Jorgensen, you tell me if this works for you, is go ahead and poll the Planning Commission on the item that has been spoken to by 2 people now regarding the review level on the multifamily issue. And then if you have a majority of people on the commission that would like to see that as a changed refinement for the finished plan, that can be part of the discussion that the council has next.
All right, let's do that. Commissioner Kogler, would you like to see that discussed further?
That bears some additional further discussion, Madam Chair. Sitting on the HCOC, along with my fellow commissioner, Mr. Neal, I think we paid particularly attention to that, and I'm not speaking for him, speaking only for myself. I did have some reservations initially, particularly when the number started up around 20, and I think came around to saying that 10 maybe was a workable number, particularly since, as Genevieve commented, there was to be some kind of check on that at some reasonable time out to make sure that that's working. I think the other thing that can't get lost in this discussion is the point that Warren made, that DRC is still a review entity in these, and so it's not as though it's purely, in most cases, a staff review. It would be DRC, and then under certain conditions, 10 and above or above 10 to the full planning commission. So I'm comfortable with, I think, the element that's been put in place that is a bit of a check on this over time to make sure that it's working well and nothing falls through the cracks.
All right. Commissioner Neal?
I completely concur with Commissioner Kogler in his statement. So it is.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner Christensen?
I would say that My concern is about the 10, and I think that the staff has done a much better job at streamlining their process anyway, and I don't see why we can't meet a faster threshold of, even with the 5 units. My view would be that I think that it's important, since we are talking about, we're still small enough city that we could be, really involved in the way that it's designed and the way that comes to fruition. So my opinion is that I think we should really review that. I'm not in favor of the 10.
All right, and Commissioner Gibson, what are your thoughts?
I would echo the comments of Commissioner Christensen. We're a relatively small town, and I think that 10 is a fairly large project, particularly in certain parts of the town, such as the west side. And I would think that would bear some additional thought on that subject. Thank you.
All right, and I do agree that I just like it to be reconsidered. And so there we are, Mr. Mayor, bit split.
If I'm counting correctly, are we at 3-2? 1?
Yes.
2. So I am going to go ahead and make that as part of my question as we move forward into council discussions. And this is an important issue. I don't want to short circuit any conversation. Would you like to poll your group on whether or not there are any other refinements that we should be bringing forward for discussion at the council level?
All right, let's do that real quick. Commissioner Kogler, anything else?
No, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Neal?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, Commissioner Christensen, anything else?
No.
Okay, and Commissioner Gibson?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, and I don't have anything either.
Excellent. Thank you all very much for that. We're going to shift gears now, bring it back to the council for their comments, starting off with Councilman Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Echoing again the Commissioners Kogler and Neal, I definitely agree that, moving it up to 10 units with regard to those type of projects would save time and cost. And that's really what it's all about, to stimulate development, is to try to keep costs down and time down as far as we can to get projects moving. So just as long as, again, we had checks and balances, and it appears it is, that anyone really who wishes to appeal a project obviously can do that. But at this point, housing constraints, it's a goal to improve the speed of things development-wise, and this is one way, and I certainly approve of that. The other thing, again, I thought possibly, and then we are actually on that slide, the sites inventory, with regard to that question I had about South Chandler and Olson, in their development agreement, they offered units. Question for Warren then, is it the point that we're trying to meet the minimum number? What is it if we add more numbers to this arena? In other words, because we did approve them and they did offer them, not that we can actually count on them, I guess, but the point is they have been discussed, and they are actually, in my opinion, an inventory type of item, but we're not showing that anywhere. So is it important not to show it? What's the plus and minuses about that?
Well, the concern is if you overpromise and underdeliver, there's potential issues you run into with the state in the future. So the approach is more conservative, where we want to promise what we know we can deliver. If we produce additional units, that's always a benefit. You're always kind of thinking about the next arena cycle and how your current evaluation is going to be. So to put in those units, it's not that we couldn't, we can. They're not going to help us with certification, but they could potentially raise a question or increase a threshold in the future, potentially. The development agreements are going to stand either way. So, whatever's in the development agreements, that's going to happen. Part of the deal with the development agreements, though, is they've got some options, some sort of either ors, and that becomes just confusing in terms of explaining those. And I think that's the other concern, is we just don't want to raise questions that might slow down the HCD review process.
I see. Yeah, I probably the wiser move to not to really talk about them, but they are there in a case that if something falls down, then we have some backup too, so.
Yeah, in the end, if some of the other sites don't deliver and we build these units instead, we'll still be able to hopefully exceed whatever our arena is. And that's really a floor, not a ceiling. So we intend to hit these as minimums, not that we're shooting for them as maximums. We definitely believe we can hit all these numbers.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Strong.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to be a little more extensive possibly. First, I want to thank everybody, all the people involved in this for doing such a fantastic job. We are doing such a great job in Paso Robles, and that's one of the reasons I think that I've been chosen to represent this area at the state level on one housing committee and in the super region, the 4-county region, on another housing committee. I think you know I serve as the president in my second term now for SLOCOG, and $500,000 of SLOCOG's money is set aside to help us plan some of these units that we're referring to as the county. And it's actually SLOCOG that is working with the cities to get this done and get some plans actually available, stock plans that can be used. But I go back to what I said before, that I think there's a couple of things that should be in here because we have stepped up. And Vince might not remember this, but when he mentioned what he did, we actually did it. I'm not saying that we were the only one that planned it. We were the only ones that actually produced the units that were in our arena numbers in every single category last time except the high income. And that particular area is already covered now this time. But it wouldn't hurt to mention that history a little bit somewhere in the introduction to our housing element, I would hope. Because sooner or later, the state is going to say, well, who's done enough and who hasn't and who has to do more? And we're doing more than our share. And I don't want to see us continually given more than our share to do. So I'd like to see that referred to briefly. And the other thing is what I mentioned before, that we have a mention in there somewhere of how we are going to guarantee that these units, once they've been committed, stay in that category for at least the 30-year period that the state wants them to stay there. And that would be either through a deed restriction or CC&Rs. So those are the main things that I'm concerned about and I think should be in there. It doesn't have to be a long text or anything extensive. And our staff already has the figures. They know the numbers. It shouldn't be any problem for them to come up with the text and put it in there and make the state happy and get them off our back a little bit too next time. Thank you.
Councilman Strong, if you could help me out, please. I'm trying to take notes of everyone's points. I've got guarantee that the inventory stays in their category for 30 years. What were your other points?
Well, the other point was to mention a little bit of our history in the last RENA cycle. They are 10-year RENA cycles, and it's SLOCOG that actually allocates the numbers.
Yeah.
And we're doing more than our share. We've been doing more than our share for 20 years. And it's time that, we don't have to really do more than our share anymore. Everybody else has to start stepping up to the plate as well.
Okay.
So a little mention of our history, I think, would be really well done.
Very good. Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, I just have a question on the program 6 for the mixed use overlay. It says here to increase the density from 20 units to 30 units. How many projects do you think that we would actually see that happen in our community?
Well, the two sites that are shown on Niblick Road, the JCPenney site and then that Woodland site up by Highlands Church, we believe that both of those have potential to go to 30 units to the acre. So I think those sites, definitely that could happen. There's also some sites at the old Williams Brothers Center, which is now Smart and Final up on Golden Hill and Creston Road. There's some underutilized pads there, potentially. Those are fairly small, so even at 30 units to the acre, you're not talking about that many units because they're fairly small sites. And that's why I think it's important that we do look at increasing it from 20 to 30, just so that we can maximize these units. Because these will be rental units. These will be at least moderate. It's potential that some of these could be tax credit projects that then would be very low income units as well. And those would be additional units to what we're already promising to HCD. So I think that's another example where we think we can exceed those. So this is another piece of that.
So we want to add that. And so I see that. Okay. And then my other concern, I think is there anything that we can put in here for VA housing or the special needs housing? Does that, any kind of VA housing, does that go in the special needs housing?
Yes.
Genevieve?
Yep. So we have programs to encourage special needs housing and a variety of special needs considerations. So we look at in the needs assessment, we looked at a lot of different special needs categories, developmental disabilities, homelessness, and a variety of different types of households that need housing. And we have specific programs in place to help facilitate those. We have a program that encourages special needs housing and adds specific things that the city will do to try and encourage that type of housing. So VA housing would fall within those kind of larger categories of other special needs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to cycle back to one of Fred's comments because we're going to be coming to a decision point here about what refinements we want to recommend. Fred's concern about properties staying in their categories. Warren, is there verbiage that's easily inserted here, or is that something we're going to have to hammer out?
No, I think you can give us general direction. I think Councilman Strong was referring to the density bonus. So if we grant a density bonus, we want to guarantee there's a deed restriction to guarantee that. That is part of state law, but it doesn't hurt to just mention that as a policy, and that'll be part of our density bonus update. So I think we have enough direction on that the consultant can easily add that.
Okay, and then his desire to have some text added regarding the history of the city's performance on RENA requirements, I'm assuming that's pretty easy to do too.
Yeah, I think we can just add that in the introduction section.
Okay, very good. And so the issue remaining is the one that was a split concern with our planning commission members, and that is the issue of the level of review regarding multi-family projects. Would you please state that one more time so we're all clear on what exists in the proposed plan right now?
So I'll go to that slide real quick so that we can all see it. So the Planning Commission threshold of review for the development plan, this is program 18. So in the housing element itself, it is on page H15. And it says that the city would amend the zoning ordinance to revise the threshold of review for a development plan. The zoning ordinance requires a development plan for, among other conditions, 5 or more dwelling units per lot. The zoning ordinance amendment would revise this threshold to 10 or more dwelling units per lot, which would receive Planning Commission review. So it also says that in conjunction with the housing element adoption, this would be changed, and it would be reviewed 1 year after implementation to review effectiveness and consider additional amendments as warranted.
And also a comment on the applicability of DRC review of projects that are lower than the threshold.
So 5 and fewer is DRC review.
Okay, so we have, if I counted correctly, we have 3 planning commissioners who are concerned that the 10 would be too high a number, 2 who are okay with the 10. So I'm going to go around our council here and get your thoughts on that. Mr. Hammond?
Well, that was a question I had. It's 10 or more or 11 or more. And I just heard the conflict again. So 11 or more units then triggers full planning commission review.
That's what I heard.
10 or less. Well, that's not what she just read though.
Right.
So 10 or less then would be held at staff level. With, again, through DRC as a review board, and also anybody wanting to appeal it in the city could also do that. So To me, I think that's what I would prefer to see.
Okay, so can we get a clarification, 10 or more or 11? We seem to have a question there.
So I believe the intent was that 10 or fewer would be the site plan review, which is DRC only. 11 or more would be the planning commission public hearing for a development plan approval. And we'll clarify that in the text if that's the direction.
Very good, thank you. Councilman Strong, your feelings?
I'm comfortable with the 10 plus.
Thank you, Councilwoman Garcia.
I'm okay with the way it's worded as long as we word it correctly.
Very good, Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, Steve, I never got a chance to comment.
I know, I just realized that. I'm sorry.
I'll go ahead and make my comment on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I agree with the concerns about it being too big as well. But to me, what's important is if a neighbor's having a project of 10 units built next to them and they're not happy with the design or the result of that the neighbor has the ability without cost to appeal the project. And I guess that's a question for Warren. Would that be the protocol for that?
So we would have to establish a new kind of fee and policy for that, but we could definitely, if that's the council direction, have a no cost appeal process. We could definitely build that in to the fee structure if you wish.
So that's just a recommendation to look at on my part, but a 10-unit project is large. It won't have the review it normally has. So it gives you a little bit of an outlet where somebody can come along and at least appeal it for more information. And I'll wait for my other comments.
Well, Councilman Gregory, I skipped you unintentionally, so why don't you go ahead with your comments?
Okay. So I think first of all, I'd like to thank everybody as well on the project. Well done, another wonderful project with the Housing Constraints Committee. It's really, really important for us to work together like this and to have it so well organized that a layperson can, like myself, can hear and read the document and comprehend most of it. I think that's really critical. It's really critical that we are continuing this effort to have a broad-based housing element in our city that helps protect us and keep us in line with the city. So I applaud everybody's efforts. I don't have a lot of other changes. I was a little concerned just about the 10-unit threshold myself. I agree also with Councilman Hammond that time is money, but I've seen some projects go through the process pretty quickly that are even larger. So I'd like to extend a little confidence in our staff and our DRC to, help design projects or comment on those projects to get them through without a lot of timing and red tape. So that's all my comments. Those are the only concerns I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Gregory, and I do apologize for skipping you. I want to clarify your position on that last issue is you would like to see a process put in place for appeal of 5 or fewer units. Is that correct?
No, that would be the 10. So what happens right now, I think the 5-unit process would work well with what our system has, and I think the 10-unit one will also. The 10 units is a lot bigger in a small town than 5. So what stops people, what shouldn't stop people is to be able to appeal for more information. You can stop at the planning commission. It doesn't have to go on the council, but they could appeal it to the planning commission to review any concern of the individual.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be thick, but I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You are okay with the DRC up to the 10-unit figure, or you want a process in that range for appeal? So
on the 10-unit process,
yes,
I'm okay with the way it's set up, but I think an individual, a neighbor, immediate neighbor of the project should have the ability to appeal that to the planning commission if there's any concern.
Okay, so we could build that verbiage in then.
Mr. Mayor, discussion on that?
Yes, please, Mr. Hammond.
Warren, what is the fee for someone to appeal decision on any level at this point with the planning commission?
We believe it's about $400.
Right.
I can double check though.
Yeah, well, I think that's important. Mr. Gregory, if you can remember again, that I think that's important to recover staff time and everything. If they're going to be hearing something like this and it wasn't charged in the first place, that we do need to recover costs. So that I think is kind of important that we don't tamper with that policy at this point. But yet, what's really important that it can be appealed, really, and that's the whole effort here. That it's just not going to be run through staff level and that's it. So I think we need to hold that policy and keep that as standard as we are currently doing.
So let's have some more discussion on that, John. So I'm not opposed. Well, here's my issue. Warren, how much time, public time, does someone have to see a 10-unit project?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So when does the general public get to see their project next door to them being built in the way it's set up for up to 10 units?
When would they see it?
Yes, when they start building or in the planning process? When?
Yeah, I think that's the issue with the site plan review process at DRC is there isn't a public notice until basically construction starts, whereas with the development plan process, there is a legal public notice that's run ahead of time. It's possible with site plan reviews, we could do site noticing. We don't do those, but that would be a change we could make that might address that issue.
Well, so currently, if somebody wants to build a 5-unit project and is properly zoned for it, there is no public hearing for that process. It's just looked at by DRC and approved, correct?
Correct.
So this threshold would move it to a 10-unit project without any public review, but just staff and DRC review. And that's maybe, I would be okay with noticing, it's pretty cheap to notice, the 300-foot neighbors on that level. And that would save the issue on the on the appeal, because if they're gonna have concerns, they're gonna hear about it at the public hearing.
Hammond would agree on that too.
Garcia would agree also.
Mr. Strong?
As long as we pick up the cost of noticing, yeah.
Any further comment on that, Mr. Gregory?
And just to clarify, the cost of an appeal is $210 currently.
Okay.
Okay.
And what about cost of noticing?
So if it's just a site notice, it's basically probably about an hour of staff time. We could look at recouping that through the site plan review application process.
Yeah. So the applicant would still be responsible for that kind of cost is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so we can build that into that site plan
Absolutely.
fee.
Right.
Okay, that's
okay.
Good to me.
Okay, so what I'm hearing now, the issues that the council would weighed in on are Mr. Strong's issues of maintaining properties in their appropriate categories long-term, also textual reference to the city's successes regarding RENA in the past, and then on this issue of multifamily review, we're good with the 10-unit level as long as there is public notice
of the project.
Of the project. Am I hearing that correctly?
I do have another comment.
Yes, go ahead.
On Mr. Strong's, whatever you want to tie it up with the
yes.
deed restriction, I think he needs a state for density bonus. So they are receiving something and they're paying it back by deed restricting it. Does that make sense?
That broke up on me, Steve. I didn't hear all of it.
Agreed. That was my intent.
Okay, so that is
okay.
Because it's a deed restricted product.
Yes.
That the deed restriction would be okay with me for 30 years, as long as they're receiving a benefit.
Okay, I got you now. I got you. Anybody on the council have heartburn with that?
No.
Okay, and the other issues we're all good on the level of review with public notice?
Yes.
Okay, To the staff, I don't have a resolution or anything to take a vote on. Is this indication enough of direction to staff?
Yeah, let me just clarify staff's understanding, and if we could get consensus on that, I think we would be in luck on this. So let me just go back really quick. One second. I'm just restarting a computer. Hang on a second. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the direction we have here is that we will add to the introduction section reference to the 2014 RENA process and how the city was successful in providing the units that were allocated. That we will add some sort of policy language that clarifies that any deed restriction or any density bonuses that are approved would have minimum 30-year deed restrictions. And then on program 18, we will clarify that site plan reviews are required for projects up to 10 units, development plans for 11 units or more, and that we will begin providing site notices to the public for the DRC meetings on site plan reviews. So those are the three changes that staff would be adding to the draft document.
Okay, let's make sure we're online with that. Mr. Hammond, you good with that?
Yeah, the only thing, Warren, is that we're going to still hold the policy of $210 for the appeal, or is that what you said, I think?
Yeah, there would be no change to that.
No changes, exactly. That's what we do currently. Right, thank you.
Very good, Mr. Strong?
Yes, no problem.
Councilwoman Garcia?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Thank you. And Mr. Gregory, please give us your position twice so we're even now.
Well, I'll ask a question in my position. So, Warren, so you do a site noticing for both the between 5 and 10 units, or all of them? You didn't make that clear.
So any site plan review of a multifamily residential project, which would be anything 10 units or less, would include a site notice that would be placed prior to the DRC review meeting.
No, I think that's good. Yep. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, so is that direction enough for you, Warren?
It is.
Okay, thank all the council members. Thank you all the planning commissioners for your thoughtful consideration of this very large and very significant housing element. And with that, I will turn it back to Chairperson Jorgensen to adjourn her commission.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I will take a motion from the commission to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chair.
I second it. Christensen seconds.
Kogler moves and Christensen seconds, and I think we have consensus. So thank you.
Thank you all. We're back now. We're back now to meeting as the Paso Robles City Council. We are on item 9A, Economic Development Administration Grant Application for installation of optical fiber cable in underserved areas of the city.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is Sarah Johnson-Rios. I'll be providing the presentation. I'll just pull it up here. Okay. So before you for consideration is a grant application opportunity that the city has to apply for one-time CARES Act Economic Development Administration funds to install conduit and optical fiber cable in underserved areas of the city. These funds are available on a first-come, first-served basis. So the council is familiar with the benefits of greater digital connectivity. It can transform business, education, health, and transportation, and can also be a catalyst for government innovation, economic development, etc. Cities can be catalysts for this investment in public infrastructure to reduce internal costs and improve operations. And it looks like you're not seeing all the points on the slide. There we go. Some additional context for you. The recent census data indicates that roughly 17% of households in Paso do not have access to broadband internet. And it's also important to recognize that council has established economic development as one of your primary goals in your recent goal setting sessions. In addition, as you may recall, council already approved city investment in fiber network back in May 2019, when staff was directed to work with a local internet service provider, Digital West, to expand fiber networks in the city using $500,000 in preliminary city investment funds. While much progress has been made on that agreement, a final agreement has not yet been reached, and in the most updated discussions, it's not anticipated that city funding would be needed for that project. So this is a new opportunity, this EDA grant funding, to provide something similar in a way that would still allow the city to move forward with internet service providers like Digital West in future public-private partnerships. So while this is first and foremost a grant opportunity that's focused on economic development and the ability to retain existing jobs and attract new ones, the project, if we apply and if we're awarded, would have farther-reaching benefits. Expanding a fiber network would increase competition in the market, would increase household access to high-speed internet, could benefit distance learning and job training. It could provide opportunities for telecommuters and provide customers with options and potential cost savings. Particularly in the pandemic context and the post-pandemic context, expanding options to work, learn, receive healthcare, and accomplish daily tasks remotely is becoming increasingly important. So what's the opportunity? Well, we have a one-time opportunity to seek what we're estimating to be $2.4 million in grant funds from the EDA. So the EDA received a portion of the CARES Act funds that they are dispersing. They've specifically indicated that broadband is an eligible use of funds. And so we would be applying to install high-speed fiber optic internet connectivity along more than 13 miles of key corridors throughout the city. And the reason this is one time is because the CARES Act funding expands eligibility criteria, and it also provides a more favorable cost share with the city than EDA funds typically offer. So what you're looking at on the screen is the map might be a little bit hard to see, but if you can pick out the red lines, those corridors are proposed to be built out with conduit and fiber using grant funds. And in some of those areas, the city has already installed conduit as we've gradually done street improvement projects. So that's helping. This would basically leverage that initial investment and get us to conduit and fiber on over 13 miles. The corridors that you see in blue would be planned for future construction, possibly through public-private partnerships or in conjunction with future planned city capital projects. So the EDA grant program gives the city an opportunity to address some of the issues that have prevented Digital West and the city from coming to a final agreement to date, although we are still in discussions. The grant would update and upgrade our program as we had originally envisioned it, and it would really be an opportunity to use these federal economic stimulus funds to leverage city investment in our infrastructure to still take advantage of the competitive marketplace and private sector partnerships and to catalyze progress in this area. This second map that you're seeing is actually a heat map of existing businesses and employees in Paso Robles. And so the rectangles that you see are really the clusters where most of our existing businesses and jobs exist. And the grant application, as you can see, again, the red corridors are still highlighted. If successful and if awarded these grant funds, it would take conduit and fiber and high-speed internet access to all of these key job centers around the city. So these areas are currently home to between 1,000 and 2,000 businesses and 7,000 to 10,000 jobs. Access to higher speed and possibly lower cost internet by increasing competition in the market may generate job retention and also job creation opportunities for these businesses and for new businesses. It has the potential to facilitate business attraction, additional job creation in the future. And many of these areas, the rectangles that you see, there is additional commercial and industrially zoned land that is available. So we could really see the potential for these number of impacted jobs to increase. And then I think the final thing to note is that we're seeing a huge increase in telecommuting. So while job retention, business expansion, business attraction is still going to be important for economic development, we're also well positioned with housing costs that are still fairly moderate compared to some of the larger urban centers to attract telecommuters who may be able to work from anywhere. And so this type of infrastructure would certainly be a benefit. So if council decides to direct staff to proceed with the application, there would be a local match requirement. It is a 20% match requirement. Normally, EDA funds require 50% match requirement, and it's uncertain whether Paso would actually be eligible under non-CARES Act funds. So we're eligible now because we have an opportunity zone on the west side. And typically, you have to meet other economic indicators to be eligible. So, so the 20% local match is really something that they're primarily offering due to the pandemic. So in terms of where the match could come from, the city has a number of major street construction projects that are scheduled soon, including the construction of the Union Road, Golden Hill Roundabout, rehabilitation of portions of Creston Road, Niblick Road, and other projects. Because installing fiber is much less expensive when it's performed as part of a street construction or reconstruction project, some of the city's costs associated with these projects could potentially contribute to part of the city's local match requirements. And we're evaluating all of those options more specifically. In terms of the broader fiscal impacts, I think it's important to note that should the city be successful in obtaining a grant, we would receive approximately $2.4 million in federal funds for local use now, which is initially a 4-to-1 return on the city's upfront investment. In addition, because we would be able to lease the capacity that we've created, so the city would own this conduit and fiber, and we would be able to lease that to one or multiple internet service providers, we would, in the long term, achieve a significant positive return on this investment. The payback period for the initial investment would depend on the lease or revenue share agreements that the city is able to develop with internet service providers, and it would also depend on the number of internet service providers that were interested in leasing this infrastructure. But our preliminary estimates indicate a payback period of roughly 5 to 10 years, conservatively, with positive net returns thereafter. So staff sees a few key advantages to this one-time grant opportunity. First, if awarded, it would really represent a significant acceleration of the city's desired expansion of the fiber network to advance economic development and the other goals that were outlined. Second, it also allows us to leverage city investment and conduit infrastructure with federal funds that are only available due to the pandemic, and still leverage both of those investments to advance public-private partnerships and create additional competition and efficiencies in the market. And third, this grant would really take us a lot farther than we could go on our own just using city resources. So it really represents an optimal use of limited city funds because we are able to get the 4-to-1 leverage initially with the grant. The recommendation before you tonight is to support the submittal of an EDA CARES Act Recovery Assistance application and authorize the commitment of non-federal resources to provide the local match requirement for the project if the grant is awarded. So at this point, we're just seeking your direction on whether or not to apply. And I do want to note before we open it up to questions that we do have a few people on the line who we've been working with regarding this opportunity. We've been working with Magellan Advisors, who and Jory Wolf specifically, who you've spoken with before. He's been working with the city on our previous fiber expansion efforts. And then we also have Greg Goodman on the line. He's with the Goodman Group. If you would like us to apply for this grant, we will be using the Goodman Group to help us develop a winning application. They've secured grant funding for a number of other cities and have expertise on working with the EDA. So Greg Goodman is available to answer any questions about the grant application and process, and Jory Wolf is available to answer any questions about expanding the fiber network. We also have Dave McHugh, our IT manager, and Paul Sloan, the city's economic development manager, available. And with that, Mr. Frucci, do you have anything? I'd also want to extend Mr. Frucci an opportunity to add anything to the presentation before we open it up for questions. Okay. So with that, we're available for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Council questions of staff? Councilman Hammond?
Exactly how much are we going to have to come up with for that 20% on that number?
Mm-hmm. So we've identified at least 100,000 to 200,000 in existing capital projects, probably more. The uncertainty currently is because we have to work with the Goodman Group and Magellan as we actually get into preliminary design of this network and understand which segments along those corridors would require which funding. We'll be able to come back to you with a more definitive number. And so we'll obviously be looking to maximize those efficiencies and, minimize any additional any additional city funds that would be required.
And for the question, what is the time frame? Is there a short envelope of time to apply?
There is. So that's why we're bringing this to you tonight. The funds are available on a first come, first served basis. And so we did have a positive first conversation with the EDA, and they encouraged us to apply immediately as soon as possible with council's approval. So our aim, with your approval tonight, would be to submit an application hopefully by the end of August, definitely within the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, Sarah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Strong?
Well, this is one of those times when I'm going to rely on my mother. She was the controller for a mega corporation with 6 major corporations under her. And she used to have a phrase that said, "Don't be penny wise and dollar foolish." I think this is one of those times when we should spend the money we have to spend in order to get the money we really need. So I think this is great. Thank you.
Councilwoman Garcia, questions, please.
Well, I just have a comment, actually. I really, I know that we need this, the fiber optic for sure. As more and more people are having to work from home and even students having to take classes from home, there has been a lot of, have been getting a lot of emails from students and the parents not being able to have internet to do those things. And so I agree with Mr. Strong's mom. We should pay for it now so we can recover later. Thank you.
We are still in the question section of the presentation. Mr. Gregory?
I'm not going to talk about my mother. I have a quick question. So, Sarah, what happens with our relationship with Digital West?
Yeah, so Digital West is actually supportive of this grant application, and we would most likely wait and see if we get the grant and determine what we're actually going to be able to build with that. And then with your direction, we would continue working with Digital West to develop a revised partnership going forward.
So whenever possible, the funds will be used as a private enterprise to help us install this system?
Right. So this would essentially accelerate the community's ability to build out fiber. I think Digital West the very initial proposal, I think, was a $5.7 million projected investment. And so this $3 million investment would, get us basically halfway to what was originally anticipated, or somewhere in that ballpark.
And the return on investment, how do we get those funds back?
So we would get those back through lease payments from the fiber. And so this would expand the quantity of conduit and fiber, expand the locations where we would have that available. So we should anticipate, being able to receive more revenue than we would have had an opportunity to receive without being able to build out in all of these areas.
And you probably don't know the answer to this question, but I'll ask. Because it's such a quick hitting grant, since it's happening so quickly, will the return of the grant be as fast?
You mean when we would actually receive the funds if we were awarded?
Yes.
I don't know the exact timeline, but I think that their intent is to disperse the CARES Act funds as quickly as possible. So I would anticipate it would be within a matter of months.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have no questions. Who do we have lined up for public comment?
Dale Guston is on the line.
Mr. Guston, welcome.
Hi, Dale Guston. Hi, Dale Guston, 945 Spring Street. Actually, there was some confusion. I had no questions on the previous one, but a couple of comments that I want to add. And the first one was, Mr. Martin probably remembers when Debbie Ducey used to brag about a 900 square foot unit. Well, maybe she was ahead of her time. But also, I want to add my comments to thanking Larry Warner and Vince Vanderlip for all their contributions over the years to our planning and housing. And lastly, just a cautionary thing. I grew up in Southern California when the tallest building was the City Hall. Well, as that changed and we got more and more density in downtown LA, so did the congestion get to be a problem. I don't want to see Paso Robles get to that point, please. And on the fiber optics, go for it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else waiting for public comment?
Jeff Carr.
Welcome.
Hello, Jeff Carr. This discussion here on the broadband grant.
Yes, you're on.
Mr. Carr, you are live. You can make your comments.
Oh, hello. Yeah, this is Jeff Carr. I wanted to, well, first off on this, yeah, it seems like an obvious thing to do, to go get the grant, and I wish you well and hope it comes through. I would like to see more detail, the same way I would have liked to have seen it in the previous arrangement on how you plan on recouping the money. So far, it's, I've heard just very broad terms, and I think you need to get a little more detail into that and maybe even identify some customers for those leases. Also, I was curious if there were any other options you were looking at for CARES funds, and is this just one aspect of that, or would this preclude any of those other options that possibly the city might need? Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else waiting?
No other callers.
Thank you. I'll close public comment, bring it back to the council. Could you please comment on, can we get any further detail, or how will we get further detail on how we recoup our share of these funds? And do you have like a short list of customers we're going to approach?
So we have had one preliminary conversation with Digital West, and they would be interested in continuing to partner with the city and to utilize the fiber that we would install with this project. So we do have that preliminary information. We don't have numbers at this point in terms of what the definitive annual revenue would be. But based on our prior discussions under the previous fiber network model, we are anticipating a payback period of 5 to 10 years of the city's 20% match. And if there were additional internet service providers who are also interested, then that would be a shorter payback period.
And how would we go about finding those additional providers?
Well, we would certainly approach Charter and AT&T, who are already providing services in the community. We're not certain that they would be interested in using a city's fiber. So we would also, make a, we would start marketing this if we were to receive the grant. And I could invite Jory Wolf potentially to add more detail on how he's seen this work in other communities.
Certainly. Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Jory Wolf, Magellan Advisors. As is done in many other cities, once they develop public assets, typically through traffic signal systems and other underground conduit, where they install fiber, they put out RFPs, and the RFPs solicit interest from third parties to operationalize and commercialize those public assets for the leasing of broadband and also broadband services to carriers, for implementation of wireless services to businesses and anchor institutions, as well as setting up networks for residents. So many cities throughout the country are doing this and generating revenue from investment in these kinds of assets.
Thank you. And the other question, if I understood it correctly, was, are there other options or opportunities under the CARE Act, and how will this action affect those?
Certainly. So through the EDA specifically, we have explored other economic recovery funding opportunities through the EDA. For example, we looked at establishing a revolving loan fund for businesses, and we determined that the administrative costs of starting a new program like that and the ongoing reporting obligations of something like that would be beyond the city's current capacity to take on. And that's one of the reasons that we sought council approval to implement a local business grant program using our city allocation of CARES Act funds, for example. We have explored other ideas, and none of them, either they've been ineligible or not really viable. This is currently the primary viable option in terms of using CARES Act funds for economic recovery.
Thank you. Council comments and/or action. Mr. Hammond.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I comment basically, and broadband expansion is the key to the future, and said that years ago when we were talking about our own internet. And anytime we can get 400 or 500% leverage on our money is huge, and with an effort to recover the cost over time as well. The only question I had, maybe from staff again, is it sounds like it might be connected to the CARES Act fund. In other words, contingent upon Paso Robles and COVID-19. Is there any restrictions or I'm not sure how to say it, but it's some way that we could fail through the application?
Are you asking about our chances of receiving the grant if we apply?
Right. In other words, it has to do with supporting cities through the CARES Act, and I'm just wondering if there's any ties to COVID-19 restrictions or anything like that associated with this this whole effort.
So we will have to demonstrate how this project relates to COVID-19 economic response and recovery. And we will work with the Goodman Group to ensure that we do that effectively under the EDA's notice of funding availability. This, like any grant application, this is a competitive grant application. So we would submit an application as soon as we're able, given that the funds are first come, first served. And we would, there's no guarantee of an award. It wouldn't preclude us from applying for any other funds if that's what part of the question is.
Councilmember Hammond, I would also note that just as with the $380,000 direct allocation to the city, we would be eligible for these funds through the CARES Act only if we do comply with state and county guidelines.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Councilman Strong.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval.
Do I hear a second?
Second from Hammond.
I have a motion from Councilman Strong, second from Councilman Hammond, and I'm assuming this is to approve the recommendation and approve the resolution as stated in the staff report. Do we have any further discussion from the council? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Strong.
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond.
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia.
Aye.
Councilmember Gregory.
Aye.
And Mayor Martin.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Council business and committee reports. Mr. Hammond.
No real committee reports that I went to. I do have some questions and some observation maybe staff could answer. On the K-Rail expense, Frida was saying that it's going to cost us about $7,000 a month. I just quickly ran through looking at these same K-Rails. For about $47,000, we could buy that, which would be recovery in about 5 to 6 months. And I have a feeling that we're going to need them at least that long, maybe longer. And if not, for the future, for just city resources. So I'd like to hear maybe if the staff could think about maybe looking around to see there might be some used ones, things like that we could actually save instead of paying out that money every month. Plus, on the other flip side, the reason I even wrote it down was to get some sort of cost recovery from the restaurants. I think we were planning on using CARES Act dollars, if we're not mistaken. Is that correct, Tom?
Yes, sir.
So is there a reason why we couldn't ask some sort of percentage from the restaurants that are asking to take our parking spaces? I think the public should certainly get some sort of a recovery from them.
So as to both parts of your question, number one, Ms. Berman is in fact looking at the whole lease versus buy approach. So I'm sure she'll look to see which is the most cost-effective approach for us. As to requesting reimbursement from the restaurants for part of all of this expense, the direction from the council initially did not include a requirement that we do that. However, that is certainly a policy decision of the council's.
Well, I think that's something I think we should, if nothing else, agendize and bring that back to council for discussion. But again, it's something that I'm not really saying that we should fully charge the restaurants, but certainly some sort of percentage. And then the second question I had was maybe, is there any way you can give us a little quick update on the riverbed fire mitigation and the homeless relocations information that's going on currently?
Certainly glad to. And with Chief Stornetta, as Assistant City Manager Johnson Rios indicated, at the Park Fire, Randy Harris is in fact both running the entire program as well as acting fire chief at the moment. If he is online, he may want to give that update. If given he's holding down several jobs, if he is not online, I'd be happy to do it. Chief Harris, are you online? Okay, then in that case, happy to do it. We do in fact plan to open the new campsite at Borg Key Flats tomorrow, and that's kind of a soft opening. And then the police department will be issuing the 72-hour notices starting early next week, and Chief Lewis indicates that should take about a week for the CAT team to make contact with all the homeless and issue all the notices. Chief Harris did indicate that they have already noticed there are approximately 40 homeless who are right now camping very near Borky Flats, and some of them have moved from their prior sites, so they are anticipating the opening of Borky Flats.
Great. That sounds like progress is being made swiftly, and that's impressive. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Strong.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very interested also in what we're doing for parking and the downtown situation. And I am hoping that we're not taking more than 50% of the parking spaces in any block, so that there is adequate parking for the other businesses. And hopefully we're not taking parking spaces in front of businesses that aren't restaurants. And if we are, or if that needs to have further discussion, I hope it comes back to the council for that in the very near future. Other than that, I'm also wondering, have we talked to any of the homeless people about what we're doing to try to accommodate them as they get out of the riverbed? Because I think it's very important to at least have some input from them somewhere along the line. And if that's not happening, I'm just making that as a suggestion. Finally, I will report that the only meeting I think that is worth discussing with the council right now is the one I had this morning with the National League of Cities Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And we talked about a student competition that I don't know if anybody's listening that has students, but Clear Channel has a national competition for outdoor advertising with one prize for high school and one prize for college, $2,000 to $10,000 scholarships available for highway safety billboards. So I hope that people can do something with that. And anybody who might be listening and is interested can go to projectyellowlight.org in order to find out more about that competition that will begin again in January for next year. Also, we talked about a DOT competition for pedestrian safety, and we're going to have a meeting on that in the very near future. I think there's a conference call on that actually starting at noon tomorrow, and I'm hoping to get into something on that. Other than that, we talked about a couple of other things, and mostly the transportation bill that could expire in September 30th, which would cut off all of our transportation funds for the next year. We're hoping that Congress is going to act on that and somehow give us an extension that's reasonable. And anybody who has that connection with their congressman and or United States senator is urged to please urge them to extend the transportation funding for a reasonable period of time. That's about all I have to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I don't have any meetings that I went to, but I did get a call from Ms. Norma Moy at Downtown Association with some concerns from some downtown businesses. So I told her I would talk to them. I did go on Tuesday to the businesses that she had, and I spoke to them. I also walked on to the east side businesses and spoke to the restaurants, and I even printed out the permit applications for them so that they can, they had great concerns about not getting enough business for the restaurants. Now that I just heard Tom say that they're going to have a soft opening, if we could get some information and maybe if it's okay if we come down there and visit the site, if we can get a time when would be good to come down and look at it. We do get a lot of emails and concerns about this, and it'd just be nice to actually go down there and see what it looks like to be able to share those concerns with the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Gregory.
I just wanted to give a shout out to the city staff and Stacy Jacobs for assisting all the little businesses downtown that are able to get more tables open. And thank everybody for their help on that. And I think that I'd request a full report of the homeless Porky Flats, or whatever you want to call it, at the next city council meeting, and encourage all the city council to visit the site once it's open. So if we could have a full briefing or some kind of data on when they're opening formally, so we could visit. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. All of my meetings have been virtual, of course. I met with the governing board of the Channel Counties Division of League of California Cities. They are working with the League in toto for a virtual conference this year and putting plans together for virtual meetings for our Channel Counties Division. I've been online with our county electeds and the county public health officials regarding the COVID-19 statistics and actions, also our local stakeholders here in Paso Robles. I attended the Economic Vitality Corporation meeting. That board is looking for a new executive director now that the previous executive director has retired. I was on Sound Off today, and I'm pleased to announce that we're making good progress towards forming a mayor's diversity panel regarding racism in Paso Robles. I'll have more to report on that on or before our next council meeting. Also, just something to throw out for staff. Apparently, the League of California Cities has my name down to be a speaker for Complete Streets. And I'm sure that that happened somewhere along the line prior to the pandemic. I'd like to check that out and make sure that I'm prepared for whatever they expect of me. That's all I have. Coming up next, we have the Senior Advisory Commission meeting on Monday, August the 10th, 1:30 p.m. Paso Robles Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, Monday, August 10th, 4 p.m. Planning Commission meeting Tuesday, August 11th at 6:30 p.m. Library Board meeting Thursday, August 13th, 9 a.m. And our City Council regular meeting will be Tuesday, August 18th at 6:30 p.m. Mr. Frucci, anything else for the council tonight?
No, sir, not this evening.
In that case, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilman Hammond, second by Councilman Gregory. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all once again for your hard work. Have a pleasant evening.